The text arrived at 3:17 p.m. on a Tuesday. I remember the exact moment because I was sitting in my obstetrician's waiting room, cradling my 7-month pregnant belly, excitement bubbling through me as I waited to see our daughter's ultrasound. James had promised he'd be there. "Nothing could keep me away," he'd said that morning, kissing my forehead before heading to the office. "I'll meet you there at 3 lies." But 3 adows came and went. Then 3:10. At 3:15 I'd texted him, "Where are you? They're about to call me in. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." His response came 2 minutes later, 6 simple words that would shatter the life we'd built over 8 years. "I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry." I stared at my phone, certain I was misunderstanding. This couldn't be happening, not now, not when we were about to see our baby girls. "Face." I called him immediately, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. It went straight to voicemail. I tried again, and again. Nothing. "Olivia Pearson?" The nurse stood at the doorway, clipboard in hand, friendly smile in place. She had no idea my world was collapsing. My voice caught. "Can I have a minute? My husband is..." "What? Leaving me? Having a breakdown? Playing some cruel joke?" The nurse nodded sympathetically. "Of course, honey. I'll come back for you." I tried James again. Voicemail. Then I texted, "James, please. What's going on?" "I'm at the doctor's. Our appointment. Please call me." No response. When the nurse called my name again 15 minutes later, I followed her robotically, tears streaming down my face. I lay on the table alone, watching our perfectly healthy daughter wiggle on the screen, her tiny hands opening and closing as if waving to a father who wasn't there. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The technician captured pictures, pointing out features with practiced enthusiasm. "Look at those cheeks, and she's got quite the strong legs. See how she's kicking? Would you like to know the weight estimate?" I nodded numbly, accepting the printouts, going through the motions of a happy, expectant mother while my heart splintered into pieces. Somehow, I drove myself home. Our home, the craftsman bungalow we'd lovingly renovated over the past 3 years. With the nursery, I'd just finished painting a soft sage green. James's car wasn't in the driveway. When I unlocked the front door, the house felt different immediately, emptier. Somehow, as if it already knew. I moved from room to room calling his name, though some part of me already understood he wouldn't answer. In our bedroom, the closet door stood open, gaps on his side where clothes had been hastily removed. His toiletries were gone from the bathroom counter. His laptop wasn't on his desk. He'd planned this. While I was picking out baby clothes and assembling the crib, my husband had been planning his escape. I sank onto our bed, my bed now, apparently, and finally broke down, great heaving sobs that made my daughter kick protestingly inside me. "I'm sorry," I whispered to her, my hands cradling my belly. "I'm so sorry. But it's just us now." I must have fallen asleep from sheer emotional exhaustion. When I woke, it was dark outside, and my phone showed 8 missed calls. None from James. My sister Emma, my parents, my friend Mia. Word was spreading. I couldn't face any of them yet. Instead, I mustered my courage and called James one more time. To my shock, he answered. "Liv." His voice was tight, controlled. The voice he used for difficult client conversations, not for his wife of 6 years. "What's happening?" I whispered. "Where are you?" A pause. "I'm staying at the Metropolitan downtown. I need some time." "Time for what?" "James, I was at our ultrasound appointment, alone. Our daughter..." "I know," he cut me off. "And I'm sorry for how I handled today. I should have told you in person. That was cowardly." "Told me what?" But deep down, I already knew. I can't be a father, Olivia. I thought I could. I really did. But these past months, watching you change, knowing what's coming, I'm not ready. I don't think I'll ever be ready. The words felt like physical blows. You're leaving me because I'm pregnant? With our planned baby? The baby you said you wanted? It's not just that. Another pause, longer this time. There's someone else. The room seemed to tilt around me. Someone else, I repeated. Not a question. It just happened. I didn't plan it. Who? He didn't answer immediately, which told me it was someone I knew. James. Who is she? Cassidy. The name hung in the air between us. Cassidy, his executive assistant. The woman who'd been sending me birthday cards signed from the office family for years, who'd helped select my Christmas gift last year, a sapphire pendant I suddenly couldn't bear to have touching my skin. I reached up and ripped it from my neck, not caring as the chain broke. How long? My voice sounded strange to my own ears, calm when I should be screaming. Does it matter? It matters to me. He sighed. 6 months. Math had always come easily to me. 6 months. I was 7 months pregnant, which meant he'd started sleeping with his assistant when I was in my first trimester. When I was sick every morning, trying to work full-time as an architectural designer while growing our child, while I was attending birthing classes alone because he was working late. You should know, he continued, his tone shifting to something almost professional. I've already contacted a lawyer. I'll provide financial support for the baby, of course, and you can keep the house for now. My lawyer will be in touch about the details. Your lawyer, I echoed. You've already hired a divorce lawyer. It seemed prudent. This doesn't have to be messy, Liv. Didn't it, though? Wasn't the abandonment of a pregnant wife about as messy as it gets? I'd appreciate it if you didn't tell people about Cassidy yet, he added, for professional reasons. A laugh escaped me, high and slightly hysterical. Professional reasons. Of course. Wouldn't want the board to know you're sleeping with your assistant. Might make you look unprofessional. Olivia, did she know I was at the doctor today? Did you tell her you were standing up your pregnant wife at her ultrasound appointment to, what, pack your bags? Or were you with her? Silence, which was answer enough. I have to go, I said. My lawyer will call you tomorrow. And Liv, I am sorry. I hung up without responding. Sorry didn't begin to cover it. The next month passed in a blur of legal discussions, doctor's appointments, and sleepless nights. My sister Emma moved in temporarily to help me prepare for the baby's arrival, now just weeks away. My design firm had been wonderfully supportive, allowing me to work remotely as I struggled with the dual challenges of late pregnancy and sudden divorce. The divorce itself was moving with astonishing speed, thanks to James's apparent desire to sign away our 8 years together as quickly and quietly as possible. He'd been more than generous with the settlement. I kept the house outright, received significant alimony, and child support was set at the maximum amount without me having to fight for it. His lawyer had assured my lawyer this wasn't about money. Of course it wasn't. It was about his freedom to start fresh with a woman 15 years his junior, unencumbered by the responsibilities of fatherhood. I hadn't seen him in person since the day he left, all communication happening through our lawyers. It was surreal to be negotiating the end of my marriage without ever looking my husband in the eye. In some ways, it was a blessing. I didn't have to see his face, didn't have to watch him pretend remorse, but it also made it hard to believe this was really happening, until the day I received a package of papers to sign, officially ending our marriage in exchange for the settlement we'd negotiated. The day I would sign away James Pearson and officially become a single mother. Emma found me sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the stack of documents, my pen hovering above the signature line. You okay? She asked, sliding into the chair beside me. Not really, I admitted. I'm about to sign divorce papers from a man I haven't seen in a month. A man who hasn't once asked how his daughter is doing. Emma's expression hardened. She'd never been James's biggest fan, even before his spectacular betrayal. Then he doesn't deserve either of you. I know. But I gestured helplessly at my enormous belly. This isn't how it was supposed to be, Em. She was supposed to have two parents who loved each other, a father who wanted her. She has a mother who will move mountains for her, and she has me and Mom and Dad and your friends. That's a lot of love. I nodded, wiping away tears. I'm scared. Of birth? Because that's totally normal. No. Well, yes, but that's not what I mean. I placed my hand on my belly, feeling my daughter's reassuring movements. I'm scared of doing this alone, of failing her. Emma took my hand, squeezing it firmly. Listen to me. You are the strongest person I know. You're going to be an amazing mother. And James Pearson is an absolute idiot for not realizing what he's throwing away. I managed a wobbly smile and signed the papers, officially ending my marriage with a few strokes of a pen. It felt both monumental and strangely anticlimactic. Later that night, as I tried to find a comfortable sleeping position, my phone lit up with a text. From James. I heard you signed the papers today. I wanted to say thank you for making this easy. I know I don't deserve your cooperation. I stared at the screen, anger rising. Making this easy? As if I'd had any choice in the matter. Another text came through, before I could decide whether to respond. For what it's worth, I do think about the baby. I hope someday she'll understand this was for the best. This pushed me over the edge. I typed back furiously, her name is Lily. Not the baby. And no, she won't understand why her father abandoned her before she was even born to shack up with his assistant. But thankfully, she'll have enough people who actually love her that your absence will just be a footnote in her life. I hit send, then immediately blocked his number. No more. I was done with James Pearson. 3 weeks later, after 36 hours of labor, I gave birth to Lily Emma Pearson, 7 pounds, 4 ounces of absolute perfection. As I held her in my arms, her tiny hand wrapped around my finger, I made her a promise. It's you and me against the world, little one, and we're going to be just fine. Adjusting to life as a single mother wasn't easy, but I found strength I never knew I possessed. Lily was a relatively easy baby, sleeping well and growing steadily. My parents helped whenever they could, and Emma continued to stay with me during the first few months. My design firm allowed me to work from home 3 days a week, which made childcare more manageable. James, true to form, remained absent. He paid his child support on time, sent an impersonal bouquet when Lily was born, and otherwise seemed content to pretend she didn't exist. It was both painful and a relief. I didn't have to share her, but I hated that she would grow up without a father. I was just beginning to find my rhythm as a working single mother when I received the call that would change everything again. Olivia Pearson? The voice on the phone was formal, unfamiliar. Yes, this is she. This is Martin Hoffman, attorney for the estate of Arthur Winters. I'm calling regarding your grandfather's will. My grandfather. I hadn't seen him in years, not since my mother's contentious falling out with her father when I was in college. The Winters family was old money, Boston aristocracy, and extremely complicated. My mother had walked away from all of it, including her substantial inheritance, for reasons she'd never fully explained. I'm sorry. There must be some mistake, I said. My grandfather and I aren't in contact. Nevertheless, Ms. Pearson, you are named as a beneficiary in his will. Mr. Winters passed away last week. The reading of the will is scheduled for this Friday in Boston. Your presence is requested. I glanced at Lily, happily batting at toys in her bouncer, then at my calendar, full of work deadlines and pediatrician appointments. I'm sorry, but I can't just fly to Boston. I have a 4-month-old baby and work commitments. I understand. The inconvenience, Mr. Hoffman said, his tone suggesting he didn't understand at all. However, the terms of your inheritance require your presence at the reading. Mr. Winters was specific about certain conditions. What conditions? What inheritance? I haven't spoken to my grandfather in over a decade. I'm not at liberty to discuss the details over the phone, Ms. Pearson, but I can tell you that it's substantial. Life-changing, one might say. I sat down, suddenly needing the support. Life-changing how? Again, I can't discuss specifics, but I would strongly advise making arrangements to attend. The reading is at 2 p.m. Friday, at the offices of Hoffman, Blake, and Associates in downtown Boston. Accommodations can be arranged for you and your child if necessary. My mind raced. Life-changing inheritance? From a grandfather who'd effectively disowned my mother? It seemed suspicious, almost like a cruel joke. I'll need to make arrangements, I said finally. Can I call you back tomorrow? Of course. He provided his contact information, then added, And Ms. Pearson, I knew your grandfather well. He wasn't a perfect man, not by any means, but he did regret how things ended with your mother. This inheritance, it's his way of trying to make amends. After hanging up, I immediately called my mother. Her reaction was exactly what I expected, dismissive, bordering on hostile. It's a waste of time, Olivia. Whatever game he's playing from beyond the grave, don't get involved. You're better off without Winter's money and all the strings that come with it. But Mom, the lawyer said it was substantial. Life-changing were his exact words. With Lily to consider now, I can't just ignore that. My mother sighed heavily. Arthur Winters never gave anything without expecting something in return. Just be careful. And if you do go, don't sign anything without having your own lawyer review it first. Despite my mother's warnings, I found myself booking flights to Boston 2 days later, Lily in tow. Whatever my grandfather's motivations, I needed to at least hear what he had left me. Single motherhood was expensive, and while I was managing, an inheritance could provide security for Lily's future. What I never expected was that news of my mysterious inheritance would reach James before I'd even left for Boston. The day before my flight, as I was packing Lily's seemingly endless supplies, my doorbell rang. When I opened it, I found myself face to face with my ex-husband for the first time in 5 months. James looked essentially the same. Handsome in that polished, executive way, his dark hair perfectly styled, wearing an expensive suit that emphasized his athletic build. But there was something different in his eyes, a calculation I'd never noticed when we were married. James, I didn't invite him in. Why are you here? His eyes moved past me, scanning the entryway of what had once been our shared home. I heard about your grandfather. I wanted to offer my condolences. I raised an eyebrow. You didn't even know my grandfather. We never met him, remember? Because he and my mother weren't speaking? He had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. Still, losing family is hard. I wanted to check on you and see Lily. Now you want to see Lily? After 5 months of nothing? I've been giving you space. Liv, I thought that's what you wanted. The casual use of my nickname grated. What I wanted was a husband who didn't abandon me when I was 7 months pregnant. What I wanted was a father for my daughter. But here we are. James sighed, running. A hand through his hair in a gesture so familiar it made my heart twist despite everything. I know I hurt you. I handled everything terribly. But people make mistakes, Liv. They can change their minds. What are you saying, exactly? He stepped closer, his expression earnest. I'm saying I've been doing a lot of thinking lately. About us, about Lily. I'm wondering if we gave up too easily. If we should consider reconciliation, for Lily's sake. I stared at him, momentarily speechless. Reconciliation? After he'd left me for another woman while I was pregnant? After he'd expedited our divorce and disappeared from our lives? And then it clicked. The timing. the sudden interest in his daughter, the talk of reconciliation. "This isn't about Lily," I said slowly. "This is about my grandfather's inheritance." A flicker of something, guilt, surprise, I couldn't tell, crossed his face before his expression smoothed back to neutral. "That's not fair. I didn't even know about any inheritance. Until yesterday." "But you do know about it. How interesting." I shifted Lily higher on my hip. "Who told you?" "It can't have been my mother." He hesitated, then admitted, "Marcus Holden mentioned something. Said he'd heard from a contact in Boston that Arthur Winters had left his estranged granddaughter a significant portion of his estate." Marcus Holden, the CEO of James's firm. Old money himself with connections in all the right circles. Of course. And suddenly you're interested in reconciliation. What a coincidence. It's not like that, Olivia, isn't it? Because you've shown zero interest in your daughter for 5 months, James. You didn't come to the hospital when she was born. You've never asked to see her, never called to check how she's doing. But the moment you hear I might be coming into money, you're on my doorstep talking about getting back together. He reached out as if to touch my arm, but I stepped back. "I know how it looks," he said. "But I've genuinely been rethinking everything. Seeing Cassidy, it was a mistake. A stupid, selfish mistake." I noticed he didn't actually deny that the inheritance had influenced his sudden reappearance. "Where is Cassidy now?" I asked. A shadow crossed his face. "We're no longer together. Let me guess. She left you for someone else?" His silence was answer enough. Karma's a bitch, isn't it? I didn't bother hiding my satisfaction. "Now, if you'll excuse us, Lily and I have packing to do." I started to close the door, but James put his hand out to stop it. "Liv, wait. I'm serious about wanting to be in Lily's life. Whatever happens with us, she deserves to know her father, okay?" A moment, looking at him standing there, I remembered why I'd fallen in love with him. His charm, his confidence, the way he could make me feel like the center of his universe when he focused his attention on me. It would be so easy to believe him, to think he'd genuinely had a change of heart. But then I remembered sitting alone in that doctor's office, watching our daughter on the ultrasound screen without him. I remembered signing divorce papers while heavily pregnant. I remembered giving birth with only my sister beside me, no husband to share the miracle of our daughter's arrival. "If you want to be in Lily's life, you can file for visitation through your lawyer," I said coolly. "But let's get one thing straight. There is no us anymore. You made sure of that. And if you think my potential inheritance changes anything between us, you don't know me at all." With that, I closed the door firmly in his face. Leaning back against it, I held Lily close, breathing in her sweet baby scent to calm myself. "It's still just you and me, little one," I whispered, "and we're stronger than he knows." As I returned to packing for our trip to Boston, I couldn't shake the unsettled feeling James's visit had left me with. Something told me this wouldn't be the last I'd hear from my ex-husband. And whatever my grandfather had left me, it was already complicating my life in ways I hadn't anticipated. Little did I know just how complicated things were about to become, not just with James, but with the entire Winters family and the unexpected legacy my grandfather had left behind. Boston in autumn was exactly as I remembered it. Crisp air tinged with the scent of fallen leaves, historic buildings standing proudly alongside modern skyscrapers, an undercurrent of old money and older traditions flowing through the streets. As the taxi carried Lily and me from the airport to the hotel Mr. Hoffman had arranged, I felt an unexpected twinge of nostalgia. My summers here as a child, before the mysterious falling out between my mother and grandfather, had been filled with trips to museums, sailing on the harbor, and elegant dinners where I'd been expected to display perfect manners. The hotel was precisely what I'd expect from my grandfather, the kind of old-world luxury that whispered rather than shouted its exclusivity. The bellhop who carried our bags spoke in hushed, reverential tones. The front desk clerk addressed me as Ms. Winters Pearson, though I'd never used my mother's maiden name. "The Winters suite has been prepared for you," she informed me, sliding a heavy brass key across the marble counter. Not a key card, an actual key. "Mr. Hoffman asked me to inform you that a car will collect you tomorrow at 1:30 p.m. for the reading." The suite was larger than my entire first apartment, with sweeping views of the Boston Common. A crib, antique, hand-carved, probably worth more than my car, had been set up in the bedroom, alongside a rocking chair that looked eerily similar to one I remembered from my grandfather's home. "Well, Lily," I said, settling my drowsy daughter into the crib. Grandpa Arthur certainly knew how to make an impression. A knock at the door revealed a hotel employee with a large basket. "Delivery for Ms. Pearson." The basket contained an assortment of baby items, organic foods, handcrafted toys, the softest blanket I'd ever touched, and an envelope. Inside was a handwritten note on heavy cream stationery. "Ms. Pearson, I look forward to our meeting tomorrow. Your grandfather spoke of you often in his final years. The items are for your daughter. Arthur selected them himself before his passing. Respectfully, Martin Hoffman." I sank into a chair, the note trembling in my hands. My grandfather had chosen baby gifts for Lily? The same grandfather who'd had no contact with me for over a decade. The same man my mother had warned me about repeatedly? Something wasn't adding up. I called my mother, who answered on the first ring as if she'd been waiting. "You've arrived safely, then?" No greeting, just her usual directness. "Yes, we're at the hotel. Mom, did you tell Grandpa Arthur about Lily?" A pause. "No, we haven't spoken in years. You know that." "Then how did he know I have a daughter? How did he know enough to select baby gifts for her before he died?" Another, longer pause. "Arthur always had ways of keeping tabs on people, especially family. Don't read too much into it, Olivia. It's just another manipulation." But I wasn't so sure. "The lawyer said Grandpa regretted how things ended with you." My mother's laugh was short and bitter. "I'm sure he said that. Arthur was always concerned with his legacy, how history would remember him. But trust me, he never regretted anything except not getting his way. Will you at least tell me what really happened between you two? All these years, you've never explained why you cut him off completely." "It doesn't matter now, Olivia. Just be careful tomorrow. Remember what I said about not signing anything without your own lawyer reviewing it first?" After we hung up, I spent a restless night, my mind churning with questions. Who was Arthur Winters, really? The cold, controlling patriarch my mother had painted, or someone more complex? And what exactly had he left me that his lawyer described as life-changing? Morning arrived with more clarity, if not answers. Whatever my grandfather's intentions, whatever history existed between him and my mother, I needed to approach this inheritance with clear eyes. I contacted a Boston attorney Emma had recommended, Diane Chen, a sharp-minded estate specialist, and arranged for her to accompany me to the reading. At precisely 1:30, a sleek black car arrived at the hotel. The driver helped me secure Lily's car seat with practiced efficiency, and 30 minutes later, we pulled up to an imposing stone building in the financial district. The offices of Hoffman, Blake, and Associates occupied the top 3 floors, with views of the harbor that would make real estate developers weep. Diane Chen met me in the lobby, a compact woman with razor-sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, who somehow made her simple gray suit look more authoritative than the power suits around her. "Ms. Pearson," she greeted me, her gaze taking in everything from Lily sleeping in her carrier to the slight tremble in my hands. "Are you ready for this?" "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, grateful for her steadying presence. The conference room was already half full when we arrived. I recognized my Uncle Philip, my mother's older brother, looking older and grayer than I remembered, but still radiating the same entitled energy. Beside him sat his wife Marianne and their son Preston, my cousin who'd always treated family gatherings like networking events for his future political career. Their expressions when they saw me ranged from surprise, Marianne, to calculation, Preston, to barely concealed hostility, Philip. Olivia, Philip acknowledged stiffly. We weren't expecting you. Uncle Philip, I nodded. It's been a long time. And you've brought a baby. The distaste in his voice was evident. My daughter Lily, I confirmed, resisting the urge to shield her from his gaze. Philip's eyes narrowed. I wasn't aware you were married. I'm not anymore. This tidbit of information seemed to please him for some reason. Before he could respond, Martin Hoffman entered, effectively ending our uncomfortable reunion. Thank you all for coming, he began, his voice carrying the weight of decades in law. We're gathered today to discuss the final wishes of Arthur Winters, as outlined in his last will and testament. He proceeded with the formalities, reading through standard legal language before getting to the meat of the will. Minor bequests were distributed, family heirlooms to distant cousins, generous donations to Arthur's preferred charities, substantial gifts to longtime staff members. Throughout this process, I noticed Philip becoming increasingly agitated, checking his watch, exchanging glances with Preston. Something wasn't going according to their expectations. Finally, Hoffman cleared his throat and looked directly at me. Now, to the primary distribution of assets. To my granddaughter, Olivia Grace Winters Pearson, I leave the following: my primary residence at 17 Beacon Hill Drive, including all contents and artifacts therein. My controlling interest in Winters Holdings, comprising 51% of voting shares, and the sum of $50 million to be held in trust for her and her descendants. The Rhines. Room went completely silent. Then Philip exploded. This is outrageous. She hasn't been part of this family in years. She doesn't even use the Winters name. Hoffman continued as if Philip hadn't spoken. The remaining shares of Winters Holdings will be distributed as follows: 24% to Philip Winters, 15% to the Winters Foundation, and 10% to be divided among current executive staff. Philip's face had turned an alarming shade of purple. You can't be serious. Arthur promised me controlling interest. We had an agreement. I assure you, Mr. Winters, everything is in order. Your father's wishes were quite clear. She doesn't know the first thing about running Winters Holdings. Philip jabbed a finger in my direction. She's an architect or interior designer or some such nonsense. Actually, I found myself saying, I'm an architectural designer specializing in sustainable commercial spaces. And while I may not have experience running Winters Holdings specifically, I do understand business fundamentals. Philip scoffed. This is Arthur's final revenge against Evelyn, isn't it? Giving her daughter control just to spite us both. Your father's motivations are not for me to speculate upon, Hoffman replied, unruffled. However, there is a letter he left for Ms. Pearson that may provide some insight. He handed me a sealed envelope, thick and heavy, with my name written in what I assumed was my grandfather's hand. There is one additional stipulation, Hoffman continued. Ms. Pearson must take up residence in the Beacon Hill home and assume her position at Winters Holdings within 30 days, or the bequest will revert to the secondary plan, which distributes the assets quite differently. He glanced meaningfully at Philip. I believe you're familiar with that arrangement, Mr. Winters. Philip's expression shifted from anger to something like smug satisfaction. 30 days? Impossible. She lives in Chicago, has a career there. She won't uproot her life for this. All eyes turned to me, waiting for my response. But I was still processing the magnitude of what I'd just been given. A historic mansion on Beacon Hill. Controlling interest in what I knew was a massive investment. Firm. $50 million. And only 30 days to completely reorganize my life if I wanted to accept it. Ms. Pearson will need time to consider, of course, Diane interjected smoothly. Is there documentation we can review about the current state of Winter's holdings? Financial reports, board minutes, organizational charts? Of course, Hoffman nodded. Everything has been prepared. And, Ms. Pearson, you should know that your grandfather arranged for a transition team to assist you, should you accept. He was thorough in his planning. The meeting continued with discussions of practicalities, but my mind was elsewhere. I looked down at Lily, still peacefully sleeping, unaware that her future had just been dramatically altered. Whatever I decided would affect her too. A different city, a different life than I'd planned for us. After the meeting, Philip cornered me as I was gathering Lily's things. "You won't last a month," he said, voice low and menacing. "Winter's holdings will eat you alive. The board, the investors, they won't accept you. You'll fail, and then everything will come to me, as it should have from the start." "I haven't even decided to accept yet, Uncle Philip," I replied, keeping my voice steady. He laughed, the sound entirely without humor. "Oh, you'll accept." Arthur knew exactly what he was doing, dangling this fortune in front of a single mother. But mark my words, you're in over your head. "Is that why you seem so confident? Because you think I'll fail?" Something flickered in his eyes. "Everyone fails against the old man eventually. It's just a question of how spectacular the crash will be." With that cryptic remark, he strode away, Preston scurrying after him like an eager puppy. "Charming family," Diane observed dryly. "Shall we go somewhere to review these documents?" "I think you have quite a decision to make." We retreated to a quiet cafe near the office, where I fed Lily while Diane began organizing the mountain of paperwork Hoffman had provided. "From what I can see so far," she said after some time, "Winter's Holdings is rock solid, diversified investments, strong leadership team, excellent reputation. Your grandfather built something quite remarkable. And now he expects me to run it," I said, the weight of responsibility settling heavily on my shoulders. "Not immediately, no. There's a president and CEO who handles day-to-day operations. As controlling shareholder, you would set the overall direction, approve major decisions. It's power, certainly, but not a 9-to-5 job." I toyed with the unopened letter from my grandfather. "Why me, though? Why now, after all these years? And why the 30-day timeline?" Diane gestured to the letter. "Perhaps those answers are in there." With a deep breath, I broke the seal and unfolded several pages of elegant handwriting. "My dear Olivia, if you are reading this, I have failed in my most fervent wish to reconcile with you and your mother before my death. Time, it seems, has run out on me at last. You must have questions. Why this inheritance? Why now? Why the conditions attached? I hope I can provide some answers, though I fear they may lead to more questions. First, you should know that I have watched your career with great pride. Your work shows remarkable talent and vision, qualities that Winter's Holdings desperately needs. Philip has been adequate as an executive, but he lacks imagination, the ability to see beyond next quarter's profits. You have inherited your grandmother's creative spirit and your mother's fierce determination, a powerful combination. As for why I've stayed away all these years, the breach with your mother was my gravest mistake. The details are hers to share if she chooses, but know that I was wrong, stubbornly, catastrophically wrong. I tried to control her life as I had controlled so much else, and in doing so I lost her. By the time I recognized my error, pride and shame kept me from making amends. The 30-day stipulation is not arbitrary. Philip has been negotiating a merger that would fundamentally change the nature of Winter's Holdings, moving it away from the principles upon which I built it. The deal cannot proceed without majority. Shareholder approval. If you do not take your place within 30 days, Philip gains control, and with it, the power to complete this merger. I do not ask you to block it blindly. Review the details, Make your own assessment. But know that I believe it would destroy much of what I've built, all for short-term profit. Now, about your daughter. Yes, I know about young Lily. I know about your divorce, about your husband's disgraceful behavior. I may have been estranged from you, but I never stopped keeping watch from a distance. The house on Beacon Hill has been prepared for both of you. Your grandmother's rooms have been converted to a nursery, using designs based on your own professional work. Forgive the intrusion, but I wanted it to be perfect. The staff has been retained, including Mrs. Collins, who helped raise your mother and who, despite being nearly 70, insisted on staying to help with Lily. I know this inheritance comes with complications. I know it may seem like my final attempt to control family from beyond the grave. Perhaps it is. But it is also my attempt to right wrongs, to secure your future, and to ensure that what I've built continues in capable hands. The choice, ultimately, is yours. I have arranged things so you can walk away with a generous settlement, even if you decline the full inheritance. But I hope you will at least visit the house, see what could be yours, before deciding. Whatever you choose, know that my greatest regret was losing you and your mother. My greatest hope is that through this inheritance, some part of me might remain in your life and in Lily's. With love and remorse, Arthur Winters, I folded the letter carefully, tears blurring my vision. The grandfather I remembered, commanding, intimidating, occasionally tender, came through in every line. So did his legendary stubbornness and his complex mix of control and genuine care. Ms. Pearson? Diane's voice was gentle. Are you all right? He knew about Lily, I said, my voice catching. He prepared a nursery for her, and he knew about James, about the divorce. That seems to have been important to him, she observed. Making sure you both were taken care of. I nodded, wiping away tears. He mentions a merger that Philip wants to complete. Do we have information about that? Diane rifled through the documents. Yes, here. Winters Holdings merging with Ballantine. Capital. The combined entity would be one of the largest private equity firms on the East Coast. Something tickled at the back of my mind. Ballantine Capital. Why did that sound familiar? Can I see that? I scanned the document, stopping cold when I reached the leadership structure of the proposed merged company. There, listed as proposed COO, James Pearson. This can't be a coincidence, I breathed. What is it? Diane leaned forward. Ballantine Capital's proposed COO for the merged company. It's my ex-husband. Understanding dawned in Diane's eyes. The same ex-husband who suddenly appeared on your doorstep, interested in reconciliation right after news of your inheritance, started circulating. The very same. My mind was racing now. He knew. Somehow he knew about this merger, about my grandfather's death, before I did. That would explain his sudden renewed interest in your relationship, Diane said. And why? He was so shocked when I shut him down. A cold anger was replacing my earlier confusion. He wasn't just after my inheritance. He was trying to control it, to use me to secure his position in the merged company. If you take control of Winters Holdings, I could block the merger entirely, I finished. No wonder Philip seemed so smug about the 30-day window. He thinks I won't stay, that I'll go back to Chicago, and then he can push the merger through, with my ex-husband benefiting significantly. I looked down at Lily, now awake and observing the world with curious eyes. My grandfather's letter had said he'd watched my career with pride, had faith in my abilities. Could I do this? Take on Winters Holdings, move to Boston, step into a world I'd never imagined for myself? The alternative was to walk away, let Philip win. Let James benefit from a merger that my grandfather had clearly opposed. Let the company my grandfather built transform into something he wouldn't recognize. Ms. Chen, I said finally, I think I need to see this house on Beacon Hill. And then I need you to start preparing whatever paperwork is necessary for me to formally accept my inheritance." A small smile played at the corners of Diane's mouth. "I had a feeling you might say that. I've already instructed my assistant to begin the preliminary work." As we left the cafe, I felt a strange mix of determination and trepidation. I was stepping into unknown territory, taking on powerful forces, including my own family, for a legacy I hadn't even known was mine until today. But one thing was absolutely certain. James Pearson was about to discover that the woman he'd abandoned was not the same woman he'd be facing across a boardroom table. And Philip Winters was about to learn that underestimating me would be the biggest mistake of his career. Boston, it seemed, was about to become home again. And the Winters name, a name I'd never used, was about to become a central part of my identity, whether I was ready for it or not. The first time I saw the house on Beacon Hill, I stopped breathing for a moment. It wasn't just a house. It was a statement, a legacy in brick and stone, standing proudly among the most prestigious addresses in Boston. 6 stories of impeccable federal architecture, with a discreet plaque beside the massive front door reading simply, "Winters, Esther 1897. The kind of home that had witnessed generations of family history, that appeared in architectural textbooks and heritage tours. "It's something, isn't it?" Diane said quietly beside me. "It's overwhelming," I admitted, adjusting Lily in my arms. She was staring up at the building with wide eyes, as if even at her age she understood the significance of the moment. "Shall we?" Diane gestured toward the door, which was already opening to reveal a tall, elegant woman in her late 60s, her silver hair swept into a perfect chignon. "Ms. Olivia," she said, her voice warm with an accent I couldn't quite place. Something European, softened by decades in America. "Welcome home. I am Mrs. Collins," the housekeeper my grandfather had mentioned in his letter, the woman who had helped raise my mother. "Mrs. Collins," I acknowledged, suddenly feeling like a child again. "Thank you for meeting us." "It is my pleasure. And this must be Miss Lily." She peered at my daughter with genuine delight. "She has the Winters eyes, your grandfather's eyes." I hadn't noticed that before, but looking at Lily now, I could see it, the distinctive blue-gray that appeared in old photographs of my grandfather as a young man. Another connection to a family legacy I'd thought lost to me. Mrs. Collins ushered us inside, and I found myself in an entry hall that managed to be both imposing and welcoming. Soaring ceilings, a grand staircase, walls lined with artwork that probably belonged in museums, yet also comfortable seating areas and warm lighting that invited lingering rather than mere passing through. "Your grandfather made extensive renovations over the past 2 years," Mrs. Collins explained as she led us on a tour, "always with you in mind." This was the most difficult part to reconcile. The idea that Arthur Winters had been planning for my arrival all this time, redesigning his ancestral home for a granddaughter who didn't even know she was in his thoughts. The house was a perfect blend of historic preservation and modern convenience. Original moldings and woodwork had been meticulously maintained, while kitchens and bathrooms had been updated with state-of-the-art fixtures. The library, my grandfather's sanctum, according to Mrs. Collins, remained exactly as he had left it, with walls of leather-bound books, a massive desk, and a hidden door leading to a thoroughly modern home office. "He worked until the very end," Mrs. Collins said softly as we stood in this space, "even when the doctors told him to rest." Each room seemed to reveal another facet of the grandfather I'd never truly known. His passion for art, his meticulous attention to detail, his respect for history balanced with practical concessions to contemporary life. But it wasn't until we reached the 5th floor that I was completely undone. "Your grandmother's suite," Mrs. Collins announced, opening double doors to reveal what had once been a bedroom, but was now the most perfect nursery I had ever seen. The walls were painted, a soft sea green that somehow enhanced rather than clashed with the original crown molding. A handcrafted crib stood in the center of the room, not the antique from the hotel, but something even more special. A crib that matched the design specs of one I'd created during my pregnancy, but never been able to afford to build. Surrounding. It was a carefully curated collection of toys, books, and furnishings that reflected exactly the aesthetic I would have chosen had I unlimited resources. The connecting room had been transformed into a modern parent's suite with a bed for me positioned to allow easy access to the nursery while still providing a sense of separate space. How did he— I couldn't finish the question. Overcome by the realization that my grandfather must have followed my career closely enough to know my design preferences, must have somehow obtained my personal nursery sketches. Mr. Winters was thorough, Mrs. Collins said, a hint of pride in her voice. When he decided you would come here, he wanted everything to be perfect. He had people study your work, your personal style. Perhaps an intrusion, but done with love. Set Lily down in the crib, watching as she immediately reached for a mobile hanging above it. Constellations, I realized. The night sky as it would have appeared on her birth date. I'll give you a moment, Mrs. Collins said, ushering Diane out with her. Alone with Lily in this room prepared with such care for us, I finally let the tears come, for the grandfather I'd never truly known, for the relationship we might have had, for the complex mix of control and love that seemed to define Arthur Winters even from beyond the grave. "What do you think, Lily girl?" I whispered, watching as she explored her new surroundings with typical baby curiosity. "Is this home now?" Her response was a happy gurgle as she batted at the stars above her head. By the time Mrs. Collins returned, I had composed myself and made a decision. "We'll stay," I told her. "Tonight at least, while I figure out next steps." Her smile was quietly triumphant. "I've taken the liberty of having your things brought from the hotel. Dinner will be served at 7, unless you'd prefer a different time." The thought of having dinner in this massive house, served formally, as if I were to the manor born, was momentarily disconcerting. Then I reminded myself that this was my house now, my inheritance. I could make my own rules. "Actually, Mrs. Collins, I'd prefer something simple tonight, maybe in the kitchen." A flicker of surprise crossed her face, followed by what might have been approval. "Of course, Miss Olivia. The kitchen it is." After she left, Diane gathered her things. "I should head back to my office. There's quite a bit of paperwork to prepare if you're accepting the inheritance." "I am," I said, surprising myself with the firmness of my conviction. My grandfather wanted me to take this on, and now I want it too. Not just for Lily's security, but to prevent Philip and James from taking what isn't theirs to take. Diane nodded, satisfied. "I'll file the preliminary acceptance papers tomorrow. In the meantime, I suggest you start familiarizing yourself with Winters Holdings. The board will expect you to make an appearance soon." Once she had gone, leaving me with a thick folder of information about the company I now controlled, I found myself wandering the house with Lily. Each room seemed to reveal another layer of my grandfather's personality, another glimpse into the life he'd built. In what had clearly been his bedroom, I found a collection of photographs I hadn't expected, my mother as a young woman, me at various ages, even recent pictures of me at professional events. One frame held a newspaper clipping of a design award I'd won 2 years prior. He'd been following my career all along, proud from a distance he'd never been able to bridge. Dinner in the kitchen turned out to be a revelation. Mrs. Collins was an excellent cook, and the kitchen itself was a warm, inviting space where I could imagine family gatherings more easily than in the formal dining room. As we ate, she shared stories of my grandfather that painted a more complex picture than my mother's bitter recollections. He was a difficult man, she acknowledged, demanding, sometimes harsh, but he loved deeply, in his way. When your grandmother died, something in him broke. He became more rigid, more controlling, especially with your mother." "Do you know what happened between them?" I asked. "Why they stopped speaking?" Mrs. Collins hesitated. "It is not my place to tell that story. But I will say this. There was fault on both sides, and more pride than was good for either of them." After dinner, with Lily asleep in her new nursery, I settled into the library with the files Diane had provided about Winters Holdings. The complexity of the company was daunting. Investments spanning real estate, technology, healthcare, and more traditional industries. The board of directors included some of the most powerful names in Boston business. And somewhere in this web of corporate interests was the merger that Philip wanted and my grandfather had opposed, the merger that would benefit James. I found the file detailing the Ballantine Capital deal and began to read, my architectural design training helping me visualize the complex corporate structures being described. The more I read, the clearer my grandfather's objections became. The merger would indeed provide a substantial short-term profit and expand Winters Holdings' reach, but at the cost of liquidating several long-established divisions and eliminating the company's substantial charitable foundation. Most concerning was a clause buried deep in the agreement that would grant Ballantyne's existing leadership extraordinary control over investment decisions, essentially allowing them to use Winters Holdings' assets and reputation to pursue high-risk ventures that my grandfather had historically avoided. James's proposed role as COO made perfect sense in this context. He'd always been ambitious, always wanted to make his mark with bold moves rather than patient strategic building. This merger would give him the platform and resources to do exactly that, with minimal personal risk. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Heard you're in Boston. We should talk." James. My first instinct was to ignore it, but a better idea formed. Knowledge was power, and right now, James didn't know how much I knew about his connection to the merger. I texted back, "In meetings all day tomorrow. Dinner tomorrow night? 8 p.m. at Lucia's." Lucia's was a restaurant I remembered from my childhood. Visits to Boston, upscale enough to be appropriate for business discussions, public enough that James wouldn't try anything too personal. Perfect for what I had in mind. His response came quickly. "Perfect. Looking forward to catching up." I could almost see his self-satisfied smile, his certainty that his plan was working. He probably thought I was flattered by his renewed attention, eager to reconcile now that circumstances had thrown us together again. He had no idea what was coming. Morning brought a flurry of activity. Diane arrived with paperwork formally accepting my role as controlling shareholder of Winters Holdings. Mrs. Collins helped with Lily while I spoke with Martin Hoffman about the practical aspects of taking over my inheritance. "The board has called." "An emergency meeting for tomorrow," Hoffman informed me. "Philip has been acting as interim chairman since your grandfather's hospitalization 3 months ago. They'll be expecting you to make a statement about your intentions." "I'll be ready," I assured him, though my stomach tightened at the thought of facing a room full of experienced executives who had probably already formed alliances with Philip. "There's something else you should know," Hoffman added, his expression grave. "Philip has been telling the board that you're planning to sell your shares to Ballantine immediately upon taking control. He's positioning himself as the defender of Winters Holdings' independence." "That's ridiculous. I have no intention of selling." "I believe you. But the board doesn't know you. They know Philip, and right now, they're concerned." I understood the challenge ahead of me. I needed to establish credibility quickly, demonstrate that I was committed to Winters Holdings' future, not just using my inheritance as a cash grab. "I'll need everything you can tell me about the board members," I said. "Their backgrounds, their priorities, their relationship with my grandfather." Hoffman nodded approvingly. "Your grandfather said you were quick. I'll have files delivered this afternoon. In the meantime, perhaps a visit to the company headquarters would be beneficial? See the operation for yourself before tomorrow's meeting." That was how, 4 hours later, I found myself standing in the lobby of Winters Tower, a gleaming 40-story building in Boston's financial district, with the Winters name emblazoned in understated gold lettering above the entrance. Mrs. Collins had agreed to watch Lily, assuring me that despite her age, she was more than capable of handling one infant. "I raised your mother and 2 cousins simultaneously," she'd reminded me. "Miss Lily will be perfectly fine." The security guard's eyes widened when I presented my ID. "Ms. Winters, we weren't expecting you today." "It's Pearson, actually," I corrected gently. "And this is just an informal visit. I'd like to look around, if that's all right." "Of course, ma'am. Let me call Mr. Edwards. He's the executive floor manager." Within minutes, I was being escorted by a nervous middle-aged man who seemed torn between treating me like visiting royalty and a potential threat to the established order. "Your grandfather's office has been preserved exactly as he left it," Edwards explained as the elevator ascended to the top floor. Mr. Phillip thought it appropriate, given the circumstances. The executive floor was a study in understated luxury. Thick carpets, wood-paneled walls, art that whispered rather than shouted its value. Staff members stopped and stared as I passed, conversations halting mid-sentence. My grandfather's office occupied the prime corner position, with views of both the harbor and the city. It was smaller than I'd expected, but impeccably appointed, with a desk that matched the one in his home library and walls lined with photographs documenting nearly a century of Winters family history. "Would you like some time alone?" Edwards asked. I nodded, waiting until he closed the door behind him before moving to examine the photographs more closely. There were the expected corporate milestones and handshakes with famous figures, but also more personal moments. My grandfather as a young man with who I assumed was my grandmother, family gatherings spanning decades, and then, tucked among them, a recent photo that made my breath catch. My grandfather with a tiny red-faced newborn. The date stamp in the corner was unmistakable. It had been taken just days after Lily's birth. How had he gotten this? I'd never sent him pictures, had no contact with him during my pregnancy. Yet here was evidence that he'd not only known about Lily's birth but had somehow held her, had been present without my knowledge. The implications were staggering. My grandfather had been in Chicago, had seen his great-granddaughter, and I'd never known. Before I could process this discovery, the office door opened, and Philip stood framed in the doorway, his expression thunderous. "What are you doing here?" he demanded. "Getting acquainted with my company," I replied, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Since I'll be taking over as chairman tomorrow." Philip stepped into the office, closing the door behind him. "Let's be clear about something, Olivia. You may have the shares, but you don't have the first idea how to run Winters Holdings. The board knows it. The employees know it. Everyone knows it. Except my grandfather, apparently, since he left me controlling interest." Philip's laugh was harsh. Arthur was a sentimental old fool at the end. Guilt over how he treated Evelyn made him romanticize you. But this isn't a design firm where you can play with pretty colors and furniture arrangements. This is serious business with billions of dollars and thousands of jobs at stake. I refused to let him see how his dismissal of my career stung. And yet, here I am, the controlling shareholder. Funny how that works. His expression shifted, became calculating. "You know, it doesn't have to be adversarial between us. You could keep the house, the money, even a substantial portion of shares, all while leaving the actual running of the company to people who know what they're doing. People like you? I've been at Winters Holdings for 30 years. I know every aspect of this business, including the Ballantine merger, the one my grandfather opposed." Something flickered in Philip's eyes. Uncertainty, perhaps even a flash of fear. Arthur was resistant to change. He couldn't see the strategic advantages. Funny, I've been reviewing the merger documents, and I see exactly what he saw. A short-sighted deal that benefits Ballantine and a few key executives while undermining the long-term stability of Winters Holdings. You can't possibly understand the complexities, I understand enough. I cut him off. Including why you're so desperate to push this through. The acceleration clause on page 47? The one that grants you a special 8-figure transition bonus if the merger completes within 6 months of a change in controlling ownership? Very creative. Philip's face flushed dark red. You have no idea what you're playing with, little girl. The board won't follow you. The executives won't respect you. You'll be isolated and undermined at every turn. We'll see about that tomorrow, won't we? I moved toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Philip? I understand James Pearson is slated to become COO of the merged company, my ex-husband. What an interesting coincidence. The flash of surprise on his face confirmed what I'd suspected. Philip hadn't known about my connection to James, which meant either James had concealed it from Ballantyne or Ballantyne had concealed it from Philip. Either way, it was a wedge I could potentially exploit. I left Philip standing in my grandfather's office, fuming at being outmaneuvered, however temporarily. As satisfying as the encounter had been, I knew the real test would come tomorrow at the board meeting. Back at the house, I spent the afternoon poring over the board member profiles Hoffman had provided, looking for potential allies. 2 members, in particular, caught my attention. Eleanor Reed, a pioneering figure in Boston finance who had been my grandmother's close friend, and Marcus Chen, a younger executive who had been personally mentored by my grandfather and who, according to Hoffman's notes, had been vocally skeptical about the Ballantyne merger. I made calls to both, introducing myself and requesting brief meetings before tomorrow's board session. Eleanor agreed immediately, her crisp voice warming when I mentioned my mother. Marcus was more cautious but eventually agreed to coffee in the morning. By the time I needed to prepare for dinner with James, I had the outline of a strategy. I wasn't naive enough to think I could win over the entire board immediately, but I didn't need to. I just needed enough support to block the merger while I established myself as a credible leader. Mrs. Collins helped me select an appropriate outfit from the clothes I'd brought. A tailored black dress that projected professional confidence rather than romantic availability. As she expertly styled my hair, she observed, "You look very much like your grandmother right now." She had the same expression when preparing for battle. Was business a battle for her? Everything was, in those days, for a woman like Charlotte Winters. She fought twice as hard for half the respect, but she never lost sight of what mattered. The legacy she was building, not just for the family name, but for the good that Winter's money could do in the right hands. It was another piece of family history I'd never known, that my grandmother had been actively involved in the business, not just a society wife as I'd always assumed. Your mother doesn't speak of her? Rarely. And never about her role in the company. Mrs. Collins's hand stilled for a moment. That's a shame. Charlotte was remarkable. Perhaps not always the warmest mother. She had her own battles to fight, but a woman of principle and vision, much like you seem to be. The comparison was unexpected and oddly comforting. I was stepping into a world I hadn't been prepared for, taking on roles I'd never anticipated. But perhaps there was something in my blood, some inherited strength from the grandmother I barely remembered, that would help guide me. As I prepared to meet James, to continue the fight for my inheritance and the future it represented for Lily, I touched the photograph of my grandmother on my dressing table. "Wish me luck," I whispered. "I think I'm going to need it." Lucia's hadn't changed in the 15 years since I'd last dined there. The same warm lighting, the same rich scents of garlic and wine, the same quiet hum of important conversations, happening at tables spaced just far enough apart to ensure privacy. What had changed was me. I arrived early, deliberately selecting a table that would put James's back to the door and give me a clear view of the entire restaurant. Power positioning, a small advantage, but I needed every edge I could get. When he walked in, exactly on time, I had a moment to observe him unnoticed. He looked good. Too good, really. The same confident stride, the same perfectly tailored suit. The James Pearson charm offensive was in full effect as he smiled at the hostess, who practically tripped over herself showing him to my table. Olivia. He bent to kiss my cheek, but I turned slightly, making it an awkward near miss. If he noticed, he didn't show it, sliding into his seat with practiced ease. You look wonderful. Thank you. I kept my voice neutral, professional. I appreciate you meeting on such short notice. Of course. I've been hoping we could talk. His smile was intimate, as if we were sharing a private joke. This is quite the unexpected turn of events, isn't it? You, in Boston. Me, potentially working with Winters Holdings. Almost like fate. I took a sip of water, using the moment to steady myself. Is that what you call it? Fate? Not calculation? A flicker of unease crossed his face, quickly masked. I'm not sure I follow. Let me help you then. You knew about my grandfather's death before I did. You knew about my inheritance. And most importantly, you knew about the Ballantine Winters merger and your proposed role in it. That's why you showed up on my doorstep talking about reconciliation. James's expression shifted several times. Surprise, denial, calculation, and finally, a sort of grudging respect. You've been busy, he said, sitting back slightly. I didn't expect you to put the pieces together so quickly. Disappointed? Impressed, actually. He signaled for the waiter, ordering an expensive bottle of wine without consulting me. Once the waiter had gone, he leaned forward. Yes, I knew about your grandfather's will. Marcus Holden is a golfing buddy of Philip Winters. They've been discussing this merger for months. When your name came up as Arthur's heir, it was unexpected. For everyone, apparently. Philip assured Marcus it wouldn't be a problem, that you'd either decline the inheritance or be easy to manage. He had the grace to look slightly embarrassed at this last word. And you saw an opportunity. James shrugged, not bothering to deny it. I saw a potential win-win. Our relationship was good once, Liv. We worked well together. I thought perhaps we could again, personally and professionally. You left me when I was 7 months pregnant, I reminded him, keeping my voice level despite the anger simmering beneath. You had an affair with your assistant. You haven't asked about your daughter once in 5 months. I've made mistakes, he admitted, his expression contrite. Terrible ones. I panicked at the thought of fatherhood, of being tied down. But I've grown since then. Seeing you again, knowing you're part of this deal, it's made me reconsider everything. The waiter returned with the wine, and James went through the tasting ritual with practiced familiarity. I declined a glass, asking for sparkling water instead. I needed a clear head for this conversation. So let me understand, I said once we were alone again. You want us to reconcile so you can help me manage my inheritance, which conveniently includes pushing through a merger that benefits you professionally. That's unfairly reductive. He sounded genuinely hurt. The merger is good business, Liv. Winters Holdings needs this. The market is changing too fast for old-fashioned investment strategies. Philip understands that. Your grandfather was brilliant in his day, but times change. And the fact that you're slated to become COO of the merged company, with a compensation package worth what, $10 million annually? That's just a happy coincidence? James had the good sense not to deny it. My involvement is because I'm good at what I do. The best, frankly. Ask anyone in the industry. Ballantine wants me because I deliver results. Like you delivered results. With Cassidy? I couldn't resist the dig. How is she, by the way? Still with her new boyfriend? His jaw tightened. Cassidy was a mistake. One of many. I leaned forward. Here's what you need to understand, James. I'm not the same woman you left in Chicago. I'm not looking for reconciliation, personally or professionally. And I'm certainly not going to let you use me or my inheritance to advance your career. You're being emotional about this. No, I cut him off sharply. I'm being strategic. The Ballantine merger is bad for Winters Holdings, long term. It prioritizes short-term profits over sustainable growth. It dismantles the charitable foundation my grandparents built. And it puts people like you, people who value personal advancement over corporate responsibility, in charge of a legacy that deserves better. James studied me across the table, his expression shifting from frustrated to calculating. Philip won't let you block this deal. He has allies on the board, relationships you can't possibly understand the depth of. I'm aware of the challenges. Then be reasonable, Liv. Work with me on this. We can modify some aspects of the deal, preserve parts of the foundation, adjust the leadership structure. You get a win you can feel good about. I get my position. Philip gets his payout. Everyone's happy. The offer was tempting in its way. A compromise that would spare me the coming battle with Philip and the board. But it would also mean allowing James back into my life, allowing him to influence decisions that would affect Lily's inheritance. What about Lily? I asked quietly. James blinked, thrown by the sudden change of topic. What about her? In this reconciliation scenario you're proposing, what role does our daughter play? Are you planning to be a father to her? Take responsibility? Show up for her in ways you haven't so far? He hesitated just a fraction too long. Of course. She's my daughter. I want what's best for her. You don't even know her. My voice was soft but cutting. You don't know that she has your chin, or that she hates peas, or that she already recognizes the sound of Vivaldi because I played it every night during my pregnancy. You've made no effort to be part of her life. I can change that. I want to change that. No, James. What you want is my controlling interest in Winters Holdings. Lily is just collateral, a convenient way to try to manipulate me. His expression hardened. You're making a mistake, Olivia. Fighting Philip, fighting this merger. You'll lose, and you'll be burning bridges that could have benefited both you and Lily. I'll take my chances. I stood, placing my napkin on the table. Dinner's over, James. And just so we're absolutely clear, there will be no reconciliation, no co-parenting arrangement, and no merger. Not if I have anything to say about it. He grabbed my wrist as I turned to leave. Don't be stupid, Liv. You're out of your depth here. These people eat amateurs like you for breakfast. I pulled free, leaning down to whisper in his ear. Then it's a good thing I'm not an amateur. I'm a Winters, and you're about to find out what that means. As I walked out of Lucia's, I felt a curious mix of satisfaction and trepidation. I'd stood my ground with James, made my position clear, but I'd also thrown down a gauntlet I wasn't entirely sure I could pick up. Tomorrow's board meeting would be the true test of whether I could live up to the Winters name I'd just claimed. Back at the house, I found Mrs. Collins waiting up for me, a cup of tea steaming on the library desk. Lily is sleeping soundly, she informed me. She's a good baby, content. How was your dinner? Illuminating, I said, sinking into my grandfather's chair. My ex-husband is exactly the opportunist I thought he was. Mrs. Collins nodded, unsurprised. Men like that are common in circles like these. Your grandmother dealt with many such types in her day. I wish I could have known her better, I admitted. Everything I'm learning makes her sound remarkable. She was. And she would be proud of you, taking on this challenge. Mrs. Collins hesitated, then added, There are journals, your grandmother's private business diaries. Your grandfather kept them in the safe behind the portrait in the master bedroom. You might find them useful, especially regarding certain board members who have been around since her time. I stared at her incredulous. There's a safe in the bedroom? With my grandmother's journals? Your grandfather thought they might help you if you accepted the inheritance. She smiled slightly. Arthur Winters was many things, but never unprepared. An hour later, I was sitting cross-legged on the bed in what was now my bedroom, surrounded by 5 leather-bound journals spanning nearly 30 years of Charlotte Winters' business life. They were remarkable. Detailed assessments of deals, people, market conditions, interspersed with more personal reflections on the challenges of being a woman in male-dominated finance. The entries about current board members were particularly valuable. Eleanor Reed featured prominently as Charlotte's ally and friend. Two other members, Walter Harrington and Thomas Bailey, were described as reliable if old-fashioned and principled, though cautious respectively. Philip appeared frequently, always with a note of concern about his ambition exceeding his judgment, and tendency to pursue short-term gains at the expense of long-term stability. Most interesting was a section dedicated to succession planning, written during what must have been my grandmother's final illness. Arthur insists Philip is the natural heir to Winter's leadership, but I have my reservations. He lacks patience, lacks vision beyond immediate profit. This business was built to last generations, not to serve quarterly earnings reports. I've told Arthur to look to Evelyn instead. She has the Winter's instinct for true value, for building, rather than simply acquiring. He resists, of course. Too traditional to see a daughter as a worthy successor. Perhaps he will see it differently in time. My mother. Charlotte had wanted my mother to take over Winter's holdings. Was this the source of the conflict between my grandfather and mother? Had he refused to consider her as a successor, driving her away from the family business? It seemed plausible, given what I knew of my mother's fierce independence and my grandfather's traditional values. But it didn't explain the complete estrangement, the decades of silence. I read until my eyes burned with fatigue, absorbing as much as I could about the company's history, the board's dynamics, and most importantly, my grandmother's philosophy about responsible wealth management. By the time I finally slept, I had the beginnings of a plan for tomorrow's confrontation. Morning came too quickly. I fed Lily, grateful for her happy smiles and obliviousness to the tension coursing through me. Mrs. Collins promised to watch her again, assuring me that nothing would give her greater pleasure than spending the day with Miss Lily. My meeting with Marcus Chen was scheduled for 8 a.m. at a small cafe near Winter's Tower. I arrived early, reviewing my notes and strategy one final time. Marcus was younger than I'd expected, mid-30s perhaps, with an energetic manner that contrasted with the staid image I'd formed of my grandfather's company. He recognized me immediately, offering a firm handshake and genuine smile. "Ms. Pearson, it's a pleasure to finally meet you. Your grandfather spoke of you often." "Did he?" I couldn't hide my surprise. It seems everyone knew about me, while I knew very little about my grandfather's ongoing interest in my life. Marcus looked uncomfortable. Arthur was complicated. He respected your mother's decision to distance herself, but he never stopped caring about either of you. So I'm learning. I took a deep breath. "Mr. Chen, Marcus, please. Marcus, I'll be direct. I know about the Ballantine merger. I know my grandfather opposed it. And I know Philip is determined to push it through now that he thinks I'm out of the way. He studied me carefully. And you're not out of the way?" "No. I'm accepting my inheritance, all of it, including my role as controlling shareholder of Winter's Holdings." A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "I suspected as much when you called. Arthur always said you had his stubbornness. I need allies on the board, Marcus, people who understand my grandfather's vision for the company and share my concerns about the merger. And you think I'm one of those people? My grandfather mentored you personally. According to Martin Hoffman, you've been vocally skeptical about the Ballantine deal, and your background in sustainable investment aligns with my own professional values." He looked impressed. "You've done your homework." "I've had to. This isn't a world I was prepared for, but it's one I'm determined to navigate successfully, for my daughter's sake and for my grandfather's legacy." Marcus considered me for a long moment. "Philip has been laying groundwork for months. He's promised various board members significant personal benefits if the merger goes through. Some will be difficult to sway." I don't need to sway everyone immediately. I just need enough support to block the merger while I establish myself. What's your pitch to the board today? I outlined my strategy, emphasizing continuity rather than radical change, proposing a 6-month evaluation period for all major initiatives including the Ballantine merger, and highlighting my intention to honor the core values upon which my grandparents had built the company. When I finished, Marcus was nodding thoughtfully. It's solid. Conservative enough to reassure the traditionalists, progressive enough to engage those of us who've been frustrated with Philip's direction. He paused. But Philip won't go down without a fight. He'll try to portray you as an outsider, unqualified, emotionally driven, rather than business-minded. I'm prepared for that. Are you prepared for him to make it personal? Because he will. He'll bring up your mother's estrangement, your career choices, possibly even your divorce and single motherhood. I felt a flicker of unease but pushed it aside. If Philip wants to make this personal, he'll quickly discover that's a game two can play. I have questions about his management decisions over the past 5 years that the board might find interesting. Marcus's eyebrows shot up. You've been busy. My grandfather left detailed records, and my grandmother kept extensive journals that Philip doesn't know I've accessed. A slow smile spread across Marcus's face. Arthur chose well, he said simply. You have my support, Ms. Pearson, and I believe I can bring at least 2 other members with me, Jordan Willis and Samantha Wright. They've been concerned about the merger's impact on our healthcare investments, but weren't willing to stand against Philip alone. That's 4 votes, including Eleanor Reed, who I'm meeting after this. With my controlling shares, it should be enough to at least stall the merger. It won't be easy, Marcus cautioned, but it's doable. He hesitated, then added, There's something else you should know. About Ballantine Capital. What about them? They're not as stable as they appear. There are rumors, nothing public yet, but solid whispers, about irregularities in their Asian investments. If the merger goes through, those problems become Winter's problems. This was new information, potentially explosive. Does Philip know? I doubt it. Ballantine has kept it very quiet. But it's one more reason to proceed cautiously with any merger discussions. We parted with a firm handshake and his promise to see me at the board meeting. My appointment with Eleanor Reed was next, a proper Boston breakfast at her club, where she'd been the first female member admitted in its 150-year history. Eleanor was exactly as I'd imagined from my grandmother's journals, elegant, direct, with piercing blue eyes that seemed to evaluate my worth with a single glance. Charlotte would be pleased, was her opening statement as I sat across from her. You have her chin, her posture, and from what Hoffman tells me, her spine as well. You knew my grandmother well? She was my dearest friend and the most formidable business partner I ever had. We broke barriers together in this city when women were expected to limit their financial discussions to household budgets. Eleanor buttered her toast with precise movements. Philip has been telling everyone you're an artistic dilettante with no head for business who will sell to the highest bidder and disappear back to Chicago. I managed not to flinch at the bluntness of her assessment. Philip doesn't know me. No, he doesn't. But the board doesn't know you either. They know Philip, his strengths and his weaknesses. You'll need to give them a reason to take a chance on you instead. Can I count on your support? Eleanor's gaze was evaluating. Charlotte's journals. Have you read them? Yes. Last night. Then, you know I was never a rubber stamp, not even for my closest friend. I'll support you if, and only if, I believe you're committed to the values that built Winter's Holdings. Not just as a temporary guardian, but as a true steward. I am, I said firmly. I didn't ask for this inheritance, but now that I have it, I intend to honor it. Not just for my daughter's financial security, but because I believe in what my grandparents built, a company that balances profit with purpose, that considers its impact beyond quarterly earnings. Eleanor studied me for a long moment. then nodded once, decisively. You'll have my vote to block the merger for now. The rest, you'll have to earn. She glanced at her watch. It's time. The dragons await, my dear. Together, we walked the short distance to Winter's Tower, an odd pair, the Boston finance pioneer and the architectural designer from Chicago, united by a shared connection to Charlotte Winters. As we rode the elevator to the executive floor, Eleanor squeezed my hand briefly. Remember, Philip will try to make you angry. Don't give him the satisfaction. Charlotte always said, when they go for emotion, go for the jugular, with a smile. The boardroom doors loomed before us, and beyond them, I could hear the murmur of voices. My future, Lily's inheritance, my grandfather's legacy, all hanging in the balance of what happened in the next hour. I straightened my shoulders, channeling generations of Winter's determination I hadn't known was in my blood until days ago. Ready? Eleanor asked. Ready, I confirmed, and together we walked into the lion's den. 12 pairs of eyes turned toward me as I entered the boardroom, expressions ranging from open curiosity to barely concealed hostility. Philip sat at the head of the massive mahogany table in what had been my grandfather's chair. The message couldn't have been clearer if he'd worn a crown. Ah, Olivia, he said, his tone suggesting I was late, though I knew perfectly well we were 5 minutes early. How kind of you to join us. We were just discussing the agenda. I'm sure you were, I replied, keeping my voice pleasant despite the immediate power play. However, as controlling shareholder of Winters Holdings, I believe that chair traditionally belongs to me. A ripple of murmurs circled the table. Philip's smile tightened fractionally. Of course, he said, not moving. Though given your unfamiliarity with our protocols, I thought it might be easier if I continued to chair this meeting. Eleanor Reed made a small sound of displeasure. Protocol dictates that the controlling shareholder chairs the board, Philip. Arthur was quite specific about maintaining these traditions. For a moment, I thought Philip might refuse, creating an immediate confrontation. Then, with elaborate casualness, he stood and gestured to the empty chair. By all means. As I took my place at the head of the table, I was acutely aware of the symbolism of the moment. This wasn't just about a chair. It was about establishing authority from the outset. Eleanor gave me a nearly imperceptible nod of approval as she took a seat to my right. Marcus Chen, arriving just behind us, claimed the chair to my left. For those who haven't had the pleasure, I began, I'm Olivia Pearson, Arthur Winters' granddaughter. I appreciate your welcoming me to my first board meeting as controlling shareholder. Philip snorted softly. I'm not sure welcoming is the appropriate term when you've been thrust upon us by Arthur's senile whims. That's enough, Philip, Eleanor snapped. Arthur was of sound mind until the end, as you well know. His decisions regarding his estate are not open to debate in this forum. I kept my expression neutral. I understand this transition is unexpected for many of you. Change always brings uncertainty. But I want to assure the board that my primary concern is the continued success and stability of Winters Holdings. Admirable. Sentiments? Said an older gentleman I recognized from Hoffman's files as Walter Harrington, longtime board member and friend of my grandfather. But with respect, Ms. Pearson, you have no experience in finance or investment. How do you propose? To lead a company of this complexity? It was a fair question, asked without the hostility Philip had shown. You're right, Mr. Harrington. My background is in architectural design, not finance. I won't pretend otherwise. I paused, letting the acknowledgement land. However, leadership isn't solely about technical expertise. It's about vision, values, and surrounding yourself with the right team. My grandfather built this company on principles of thoughtful investment, sustainable growth, and social responsibility. Those principles align perfectly with my own professional values. I looked around the table, meeting each person's gaze directly. I don't intend to micromanage daily operations. This company has excellent executives who know their jobs. What I bring is a commitment to my grandfather's long-term vision and an outsider's perspective that might be valuable in today's rapidly changing markets. Philip jumped in before anyone could respond. Speaking of rapidly changing markets, we should move directly to the most pressing item on our agenda, the Ballantine merger. The exclusivity window closes in 3 weeks, and delays could jeopardize the entire deal. I've reviewed the merger documents, I said, keeping my tone measured, and I have serious concerns about several aspects of the proposed agreement. Philip's expression darkened. What possible concerns could you have after only days of exposure to a deal we've been negotiating for months? For starters, the dissolution of the Winters Foundation, the liquidation of our healthcare technology division, the extraordinary control granted to Ballantine executives over investment decisions, and the acceleration clause providing certain individuals, I looked pointedly at Philip, with massive personal payouts irrespective of the merger's long-term success. Several board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Clearly, not everyone had been fully briefed on these details. Those are standard provisions in deals of this magnitude, Philip dismissed. The foundation is a tax structure that can be replaced. The healthcare division has underperformed for years, and compensation packages reflect the work that's gone into building shareholder value. $8 million is quite a reward for facilitating a merger that dismantles major portions of my grandfather's legacy, I observed. Philip's face flushed. How dare you? Additionally, I continued, not allowing him to derail the discussion, I've received concerning information about Ballantine's financial stability, particularly regarding their Asian investments. This caught the board's attention. Thomas Bailey, a cautious, silver-haired man who my grandmother's journals had described as principled though risk-averse, leaned forward. What information? Potentially serious irregularities that haven't been disclosed in the due diligence process, I said, deliberately vague but confident. I'm still gathering details, but the prospect is concerning enough that rushing forward would be irresponsible. Marcus Chen nodded supportively. I've heard similar rumors. Nothing concrete enough to bring forward previously, but certainly cause for additional scrutiny. Philip looked between us, clearly blindsided by this alliance. This is absurd. Ballantine is rock solid. Marcus, you've seen the same financial disclosures I have. I've seen what they've provided, Marcus agreed, but that doesn't mean I've seen everything. A woman I recognized as Samantha Wright, one of the board members Marcus had mentioned might support me, spoke up. I think Ms. Pearson raises valid concerns. Arthur always insisted on thorough due diligence, especially when it involved major restructuring like this merger proposes. Philip was beginning to look cornered. The market won't wait forever. Ballantine has other options if we delay too long. Let them pursue those options then, I said calmly. Winters Holdings shouldn't rush into a potentially disastrous merger out of fear or artificial time pressure. Eleanor cleared her throat. I propose we table the merger discussion pending a more comprehensive review of both the agreement terms and Ballantine's financial position. Say 6 months? 6 months! Philip exploded. The deal will be dead. Then perhaps it wasn't meant to be, I countered. I'm not categorically opposed to growth through strategic mergers, but I am opposed to rushing decisions that could fundamentally alter the company my grandfather spent his life building. Walter Harrington, who had initially questioned my qualifications, was nodding thoughtfully. Arthur would appreciate the caution. He always said, "Markets rush, fools follow, but wealth builds slowly." I smiled, recognizing my grandfather's voice in the quotation. Exactly. Which brings me to my proposal for the board today. I outlined my plan, a 6-month evaluation period, for all major initiatives, during which I would immerse myself in learning the business while maintaining operational continuity. No dramatic changes, no hasty decisions, just thoughtful assessment and respect for the foundation my grandparents had built. During this time, I concluded, I'll be meeting individually with each of you to better understand your perspectives and expertise. My goal is to build consensus around a vision for Winters Holdings that honors its history while preparing for the future. By the time I finished, the mood in the room had shifted perceptibly. Not universal support, certainly. Philip still looked murderous, and a few board members remained skeptical. But the open hostility had been replaced with cautious consideration. Thomas Bailey spoke first. I find Ms. Pearson's approach reasonable. Arthur valued prudence above all else. He would approve of taking time to make sound decisions. I agree, said Samantha Wright. And frankly, I've had reservations about aspects of the Ballantyne deal that I've felt were dismissed too quickly. Philip scoffed. So we're just going to let an untested outsider delay a transformative opportunity because she has concerns? This is absurd. The board has a fiduciary responsibility to shareholders. I am the majority shareholder, I reminded him gently. And my responsibility extends beyond next quarter's profits to the long-term health of this company. Eleanor called for a vote on my proposal. The result was closer than I'd hoped. 7 in favor, 5 opposed, but it was enough. The Ballantyne merger would be shelved for review, and I had 6 months to prove myself worthy of the trust my grandfather had placed in me. Philip stormed out immediately after the vote, not bothering to hide his fury. The remaining board members lingered, several approaching to introduce themselves more personally now that the tension had broken. Walter Harrington clasped my hand in his gnarled fingers. You did well today, he said quietly. You reminded me of your grandmother. She had the same way of standing her ground without raising her voice. Thank you, I said, genuinely moved by the comparison. I never really knew her. A shame. Charlotte was extraordinary, the real business mind behind. Arthur in many ways, though he got the public credit. I'd be happy to share some stories sometime. I'd like that very much. As the boardroom emptied, Marcus approached with Eleanor. That went better than expected, he said. But Philip won't give up so easily. He has too much at stake. I know. I agreed. This was just the first skirmish in what's likely to be a long war. Eleanor's expression was grave. You should expect retaliation. Philip doesn't handle defeat gracefully, and he has resources beyond Winters Holdings. What kind of retaliation? Hard to predict specifically, but he'll look for leverage, personal, professional, anything he can use to pressure you into reconsidering the merger. I thought of Lily, safely ensconced at the Beacon Hill house with Mrs. Collins. I'll be careful. Be more than careful, Eleanor advised. Be prepared. After the board meeting, I had planned to return immediately to the house, but Martin Hoffman intercepted me in the lobby. Ms. Pearson, if you have a moment? There's something at the office I think you should see. Curiosity piqued, I followed him to the law firm. In his office, he retrieved a sealed envelope from his safe. Your grandfather left instructions that this be given to you after your first board meeting, assuming you accepted the inheritance, of course. The envelope was heavy, containing what felt like a small object along with papers. I opened it carefully, tipping the contents onto Hoffman's desk. A key fell out first, old-fashioned, heavy brass. With it was a handwritten note and a formal legal document. The note was brief. Olivia, this opens the private vault in the basement of Winters Tower. What you find there will help you understand the true value of what you've inherited beyond money or property. The enclosed document legitimizes your claim should anyone challenge your right of access. I looked up at Hoffman, puzzled. There's a vault? What's in it? Arthur never shared that with me. The vault predates my time with the family. It was established by your great-grandfather. Only the controlling shareholder has access. Will you come with me? I'd like a witness, whatever it is. Hoffman nodded. Of course. 20 minutes later, we stood in a climate-controlled room deep beneath Winters Tower. The key turned smoothly in the ancient lock, and the heavy door swung. opened to reveal a space about the size of a small bedroom. Inside was not the cash or gold bars one might expect in a secret vault, but something far more valuable: documents. Hundreds of them, meticulously organized in archival-quality storage. Land deeds, property titles, investment certificates spanning more than a century. My God, Hoffman breathed, clearly seeing this for the first time himself. This must be the complete Winters holdings, everything the family owns or controls, whether through the company or privately. I moved through the room, examining labels. Some properties I recognized from the official inheritance documents, but many others were completely new to me. Buildings throughout Boston, land in multiple states, international holdings. I don't understand, I said, turning to Hoffman. These weren't included in the will or the company records. I suspect these are held through shell companies and trusts, Hoffman replied, examining one document. Yes, look, this building is owned by Wintrust Holdings, not Winters directly, and this one by Charlotte Preservation Trust. Why the secrecy? Privacy, tax planning, protection from creditors or litigation. Standard practice for families with significant wealth, especially old wealth like the Winters. I picked up a folder labeled simply Ballantine. Inside were documents dating back decades, the earliest connection between the Winters and Ballantine families. Martin, I said slowly, did you know about any past conflicts between these families? He frowned, considering. Not specifically, no. Though Arthur did mention once that there was unfinished business with Richard Ballantine, the current CEO's father. As I continued exploring, a pattern began to emerge. The Winters family had systematically acquired properties and businesses, connected to the Ballantines over generations. Silent, strategic acquisitions that gave them leverage without public visibility. This isn't just a business, I murmured. It's a chess game that's been playing out for decades. Hoffman nodded grimly. And now you've inherited the board and all the pieces, Ms. Pearson. The question is, what will your next move be? I carefully replaced the documents, my mind racing with implications. This vault contained power, not just financial power, but information that could shape negotiations, influence decisions, perhaps even explain the merger push that had seemed so inexplicable. I need time to digest all this, I told Hoffman. And I need to speak with my mother. About the vault. About everything. There are too many family secrets I don't understand. How can I navigate this situation when I don't know the full history? As we left the vault, securing it behind us, my phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Collins. Mr. James Pearson is here, insisting on seeing you and Lily. I've told him you're unavailable, but he's refusing to leave. I showed the message to Hoffman, whose expression darkened. That's concerning, especially today of all days. Philip must have told him about the board vote. I texted back quickly. On my way. Don't let him see Lily. Would you like me to accompany you? Hoffman offered. Or perhaps contact security. I considered it, then shook my head. No, James isn't dangerous, just opportunistic. And I think it's time he and I had complete clarity about our situation. The drive back to Beacon Hill gave me time to gather my thoughts, to prepare for yet another confrontation in a day already filled with them. What could James possibly hope to accomplish by showing up unannounced? Did he think he could intimidate me after I'd just faced down a boardroom of seasoned executives? When I arrived, I found him pacing in the formal living room while Mrs. Collins watched with barely concealed disapproval. He spun toward me as I entered. You blocked the merger. His voice was tight with anger. After everything I told you about how important this deal is. Hello to you too, James. Please make yourself comfortable in my home, I replied, the sarcasm thick. Don't play games, Olivia. Do you have any idea what you've done? The opportunity you're throwing away? I've protected my grandfather's company from a disadvantageous merger. I've preserved the charitable foundation that supports hundreds of causes. And yes, I've temporarily disrupted your career plans. I consider that a bonus. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every movement. This isn't just about me. The merger makes financial sense. The synergies between the companies. Save. The corporate jargon. I cut him off. I've just spent hours in a boardroom hearing all the arguments. They weren't convincing there either. You're making a mistake, Liv. A huge one. The only mistake I made was trusting you once. I won't repeat. I moved toward the door, signaling the conversation was over. Mrs. Collins will show you out. James didn't move. I want to see Lily. The request caught me off guard. In all our previous interactions since he'd learned of my inheritance, he'd barely mentioned our daughter. Why now? Because she's my daughter too. I have rights. Rights you've shown zero interest in exercising until this exact moment. His expression shifted, became calculating. People change, Liv. I've changed. And if you won't be reasonable about the business situation, perhaps we need to formalize our parenting arrangement, legally. And there it was, the threat I should have seen coming. If he couldn't control me through reconciliation or business pressure, he'd use our daughter as leverage. Are you actually threatening to pursue custody as revenge for a business decision? Not revenge. Reality. I'm her father. I want to be part of her life. After abandoning her before she was even born. I made mistakes, he admitted, his tone softening. I want to make them right. For a brief, wavering moment, I almost believed him. James had always been convincing. It was what made him successful in business, what had made me fall in love with him years ago. But then I remembered the board meeting, the vault documents, the larger game being played. If you genuinely want to be part of Lily's life, we can discuss appropriate visitation through our lawyers, I said formally. But this conversation is over. Please leave. Olivia. Now, James. Or I will call security. Something in my voice, a new steel, perhaps, forged in the crucible of today's confrontations, finally reached him. He nodded stiffly and moved toward the door. This isn't over, he said, pausing on the threshold. One way or another, that merger is going to happen. Philip Winters has too much at stake to let it go. Then he'll be disappointed. Because I have even more at stake. My daughter's inheritance and my grandfather's legacy. And I will protect both with everything I have. After he left, I found Mrs. Collins waiting in the hallway, Lily contentedly playing in her arms. He never saw her, she assured me. I kept her upstairs until I heard the front door close. Thank you. I took Lily from her, breathing in my daughter's sweet baby scent to ground myself after the day's turbulence. I think we're in for a bumpy ride, Mrs. Collins. The older woman nodded, her expression serious but not alarmed. The Winters family has weathered worse storms, Ms. Olivia, and you have more allies than you know. As if on cue, my phone rang, my mother's name flashing on the screen. I hesitated, then answered. Mom? Olivia. Her voice was tense. Are you all right? Are you and Lily safe? Yes, we're fine. Why? Philip just called me. After all these years, out of the blue. The shock in her voice was palpable. He said things about the company, about the inheritance. He wanted me to convince you to be reasonable about some merger. I'm sure he did. I wasn't surprised Philip had reached out to my mother, though I was curious what leverage he thought he had with her after so many years of estrangement. Olivia, what's going on? What aren't you telling me? I sighed, bouncing Lily gently as she began to fuss. It's complicated, Mom. More complicated than I ever imagined. But I think it's time you told me the whole story. About Grandpa Arthur. About why you left. About all of it. A long silence stretched between us. You're right, she finally said. It's time. But not over the phone. I'm coming to Boston. You're... What? In all the scenarios I'd imagined, my mother voluntarily returning to Boston hadn't been one of them. "I'll be there tomorrow," she continued, as if she hadn't heard my surprise. "There are things you need to know. Things I should have told you years ago. About your grandfather, about the Winters and Ballantine families, about why I left." "Mom, what—" "Just one thing, Olivia," she interrupted, her voice suddenly urgent. "Until I get there, don't trust anyone. Not Philip, obviously, but not Eleanor. Reed either, or any of them. The only person you can completely trust is Mrs. Collins." "Mrs. Collins? Why?" "Because she's the only one who knows the whole truth. The only one who was there for all of it." My mother paused. "I'll explain everything tomorrow. Just be careful, sweetheart." After we hung up, I stood in the grand hallway of my inherited mansion, my daughter in my arms, feeling like I'd stepped into a labyrinth with no clear path forward. Today's victories, the board meeting, blocking the merger, standing firm with James, suddenly seemed like minor skirmishes in a war whose true nature I didn't yet understand. Whatever secrets lay buried in the Winters family history, whatever truth my mother was coming to share, one thing was becoming increasingly clear. My grandfather hadn't just left me an inheritance. He'd left me a battlefield. I barely slept that night, my mind racing with questions. What could possibly be so significant that my mother, who had vowed never to set foot in Boston again, was flying in tomorrow? What connection could there be between our family and the Ballantines that spanned generations? And why had she specifically mentioned trusting Mrs. Collins above everyone else? Morning found me bleary-eyed in the kitchen, nursing a cup of coffee while Lily happily demolished her breakfast. Mrs. Collins moved efficiently around us, preparing something that smelled delicious, despite my lack of appetite. "Your mother arrives at noon," she said, placing a plate of perfectly scrambled eggs in front of me. "You should eat. It's going to be a difficult day." I looked up at her, struck by the certainty in her voice. "You know, don't you? Whatever she's coming to tell me, you already know." Mrs. Collins paused, then nodded once. "Some of it. Not all. But enough." "And you've never said anything? All these years?" "It wasn't my place." She sat down across from me, her expression softening. "Family secrets are complicated, Ms. Olivia. Sometimes they're kept for protection, sometimes out of shame, sometimes just because the habit of silence becomes too strong to break. But now? Now the truth is necessary. For your safety, for Miss Lily's future, and for the company." She hesitated. "Your mother should be the one to explain. I will only say this. What happened between your mother and grandfather was more complicated than either of them ever admitted. And the Ballantine family's interest in Winters Holdings has never been purely financial." Before I could press for more details, my phone rang. Martin Hoffman. "Ms. Pearson, I apologize for the early call, but there's been a development. Philip has called an emergency executive committee meeting for this afternoon." "He can't do that," I protested. "Not without my approval as chair." "Actually, he can. It's a provision in the company bylaws. The vice chair can convene the executive committee in extraordinary circumstances. He's claiming that your actions yesterday constitute just such circumstances." What's his endgame here? He has to know I still hold controlling interest. The executive committee doesn't have the authority to override the full board on the merger, Hoffman acknowledged. But they can take certain actions to prepare for it, hiring consultants, engaging advisors, initiating preliminary integrations. It's a way to create momentum and pressure. I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache building. "When is this meeting?" 3:00. I glanced at the clock. My mother's flight was scheduled to land at noon. "I'll be there. And Hoffman? Find out everything you can about Richard Ballantine, the current CEO's father. I think there's a personal history there that might be relevant." After I hung up, Mrs. Collins was watching me, a question in her eyes. "Philip's maneuvering. explained. Trying to undermine yesterday's decision. She nodded, unsurprised. He's always been predictable in his tactics. Arthur used to say Philip had ambition without imagination, a dangerous combination in business. I need to prepare for this meeting, and my mother arrives in a few hours. Can you? Miss Lily and I will be just fine, she assured me. Take the time you need. I retreated to my grandfather's library, my library now, I supposed, to review company bylaws and executive committee authorities. The more I read, the more I realized Philip's move was largely symbolic. The committee could make recommendations but not binding decisions on matters of this magnitude. It was a pressure tactic, designed to make me look obstructionist if I resisted, even preliminary merger preparations. By 11, I was in the car headed to Logan Airport, a strange mix of anticipation and dread churning in my stomach. I hadn't seen my mother in person since before Lily's birth. She'd visited briefly after James left, helping me prepare for single motherhood, but had returned to Arizona before my due date, claiming the Boston winter would aggravate her arthritis. I'd attributed her reluctance to travel to health concerns and her demanding schedule as a professor, but now I wondered if there was more to it. I spotted her immediately in the arrivals area, tall, slender, her once dark hair now mostly silver, but still carrying herself with the same proud bearing I'd always admired. For a moment, standing there watching her before she noticed me, I was struck by how much she resembled the photographs of my grandmother I'd seen throughout the house. The same elegant posture, the same determined chin, the Winters women carrying themselves as if they owned the ground beneath their feet. "Mom," I called, waving. She turned, her face lighting with genuine pleasure despite the tension evident in her movements. We embraced, and I was surprised to feel her trembling slightly. "Let me look at you," she said, holding me at arm's length. "You look different." "Sleep deprivation from a teething baby," I joked. "It ages you." She shook her head. "No, it's something else. There's a confidence there. It suits you." Her eyes searched mine. "How are you handling all this? Truly." "Better than I expected. Worse than I'd like," I admitted as we walked toward the parking garage. "It's overwhelming, but also, I don't know, it feels right somehow. Like pieces clicking into place that I didn't know were missing." She nodded, a shadow crossing her face. "The Winters legacy has a way of doing that, making you feel like you've found your purpose, even as it complicates everything else in your life." In the car, she fell silent, staring out at the Boston skyline as it came into view. I could almost see her withdrawing into herself, preparing for whatever difficult conversation awaited us. "Philip called you," I said, breaking the silence. "What did he say?" "That you were making a terrible mistake, that you needed guidance from someone you would listen to." A bitter smile played at her lips. "As if I've had any influence over Winters. Holdings decisions in the past 30 years. "But you did once." She glanced at me sharply. "What do you know?" "Almost nothing. That's the problem. I've inherited a company, a fortune, and apparently a multi-generational feud, but I'm operating completely in the dark about the real history here." She sighed deeply. "Yes, and that's my fault. I should have told you years ago, but I convinced myself it was better for you not to be burdened with it all." When we arrived at the house, my mother stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, staring up at the facade. "I swore I'd never come back here," she murmured, more to herself than to me. "And yet, here I am." Mrs. Collins was waiting in the foyer, Lily in her arms. For a moment, my mother and the housekeeper regarded each other silently, decades of shared history passing between them. "Evelyn," Mrs. Collins nodded. "It's been too long." "Agnes," my mother replied, her voice tight with emotion, "you haven't changed a bit. And you've become the image of your mother." Mrs. Collins stepped forward, offering Lily. "Your granddaughter has been eager to meet you." The tension in my mother's face melted as she took Lily, who regarded her with curious eyes before breaking into a gummy smile. "Oh, she's beautiful," my mother breathed. "She has your eyes, Olivia. And—" she faltered. "Grandfather's eyes," I finished. "The Winter's eyes." My mother nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, unmistakable." We settled in the library, the most private room in the house. Mrs. Collins brought tea and discreetly withdrew, though not before exchanging another meaningful look with my mother. "I have about an hour," I said, checking my watch. "Philip has called an emergency executive committee meeting, and I need to be there." "Already maneuvering," my mother murmured. "Some things never change." She squared her shoulders, cradling Lily in her lap. "All right, where to begin? How about with why you left? What really happened between you and grandfather?" She nodded, as if she'd expected this question first. "The simple version is that we disagreed about my future. I wanted to pursue academia, teaching art history. He wanted me to join Winters Holdings, eventually take over when he retired. So grandmother's journals were right. She wanted you to succeed him, not Philip." Surprise flashed across my mother's face. "You've read Charlotte's journals?" "Some of them. She seemed to think you had the Winters instinct that Philip lacked." My mother was perceptive. A wistful smile touched her lips. "Yes, that was part of it. After she died, Arthur became obsessed with the succession plan. Philip was the obvious choice by conventional standards. Male, business education, already, working at the company. But my mother had planted doubts in Arthur's mind. So what happened? I refused, categorically. I had no interest in finance or investing. I wanted a different life, away from Boston society and family obligations." She paused, stroking Lily's soft hair. "But that wasn't the real reason I left. Not entirely." I waited, sensing we were approaching the heart of the matter. The real break came when I fell in love with Richard Ballantyne's son. I stared at her, momentarily speechless. "You... what?" "Michael Ballantyne. We met in graduate school. He was studying business. I was in art history. It was a cliché, really. Children of rival families falling in love despite decades of competitive history. Like Romeo and Juliet for corporate America," I murmured, trying to absorb this revelation. She smiled faintly. "Less tragic, but with its own complications. When Arthur found out, he was livid. The Ballantynes and Winters had been rivals for generations, competing investments, social one-upmanship, old grudges neither family would let die." "What kind of grudges?" "It started as simple business competition in the 1920s, but became personal during the Depression when Harold Winters, Arthur's father, managed to acquire several key properties that the Ballantynes had been forced to sell. Richard Ballantyne, Michael's father, always believed Harold had manipulated events to force those sales, though it was never proven. "And you fell in love with Michael Ballantyne," I prompted, trying to keep her on track given our limited time. "Yes, we were young, idealistic, convinced our love could overcome generations of animosity." She shook her head at the memory. "Michael proposed. I accepted. Arthur threatened to disown me." "Did he? Disown you?" "Not immediately. He tried to reason with me first, then to bribe me with promises of control in the company if I'd break it off. When that failed, he went to Richard Ballantyne." "What happened?" A shadow crossed my mother's face. I don't know exactly what was said in that meeting. I only know that afterward, Michael broke off our engagement. He said his father had made it clear the relationship would destroy both families, that there were complications I couldn't understand. Her voice hardened. 2 weeks later, he was engaged to someone else, a girl from a family with connections the Ballantynes needed. "I'm so sorry," I said softly, understanding now some of the bitterness that had colored my mother's view of the Winters legacy. I was heartbroken, furious. I confronted Arthur, accused him of destroying my chance at happiness. He didn't deny it, just said he'd done what was necessary to protect the family and the company. She took a shaky breath. That's when I left. Packed what I could carry, told him I never wanted to see him or Boston again, and walked away from everything: the name, the money, the expectations. And you never told me any of this. What would have been the point? It was ancient history, a chapter of my life I'd closed. Until now. She looked at me seriously. But there's more to the story, Olivia. Something I didn't learn until years later. Something that changes everything about the Winters-Ballantyne rivalry. A glance at my watch showed time slipping away. Mom, I have to leave for this meeting soon. Then I'll cut to the heart of it. She took a deep breath. After I left, I discovered I was pregnant, with Michael's child. The implication hit me like a physical blow. You mean, yes. Michael Ballantyne is your biological father. The room seemed to tilt around me. But Thomas Pearson was the man I married 6 months later, who agreed to raise you as his own. A kind man who'd loved me quietly for years and didn't care about the circumstances. Her eyes filled with tears. He was a good father to you, Olivia. In every way that matters, he was your father. My mind was racing, trying to reconcile this revelation with everything I'd learned about the Winters-Ballantyne rivalry, about the merger, about my inheritance. Does Michael know? About me? She shook her head. I never told him. After how easily he'd abandoned me, I couldn't bear to give him or the Ballantynes any claim on my child. As far as the world was concerned, you were Thomas Pearson's daughter. But grandfather knew, I said, pieces falling into place. That's why he left everything to me, not just because I'm his granddaughter, but because I'm half Ballantyne. The controlling interest, the house, all of it. It's about keeping Winter's assets away from the Ballantynes, isn't it? Partly, she acknowledged. Arthur always had multiple motives for everything he did. When Thomas died and you took back your maiden name, Arthur saw it as a sign. The Winters heir reclaiming her rightful place, even if you didn't know the full significance. How did he even know about me? You said you never spoke to him after you left. I didn't. But Arthur had his ways of keeping track of family, even estranged family. And, she hesitated. Agnes, Mrs. Collins, kept him informed over the years. Not because of any disloyalty to me, but because she believed he had a right to know his granddaughter, even from a distance. That's how he had photos of me growing up, I murmured, remembering the collection in his office. Why he knew about my career, my design style, even had pictures of Lily as a newborn. My mother looked startled. He had pictures of Lily? Yes. Somehow he was there, in Chicago, right after she was born. I never saw him, never knew. She closed her eyes briefly. That sounds like Arthur. Present without being present, controlling, from a distance. She looked at me intently. Olivia, you need to understand something. The Ballantyne merger isn't just business. It's the culmination of a decades-long strategy. Whether they're trying to finally acquire what they believe should have been theirs generations ago, or Arthur structured your inheritance to prevent exactly that outcome, I don't know. But you're at the center of it all, in ways neither Philip nor the Ballantynes fully understand. Because I'm both Winters and Ballantyne, I said slowly. The heir to both legacies, whether either family acknowledges it or not. Exactly. She squeezed my hand. That's why I came. You needed to know the truth before making decisions that could have consequences beyond what you realize. I glanced at my watch and stood reluctantly. I have to go to this meeting, but we're not done with this conversation. No, she agreed. There's more to tell, but this is the most important part for now. She hesitated. Olivia, Be careful with Philip. He doesn't know you're Michael's daughter. Arthur never told him. But if he discovers it, he might use it against you, claim you have a conflict of interest in decisions about Ballantyne. Be careful, I promised. Will you be all right here with Lily and Mrs. Collins? A soft smile touched her lips as she looked down at the baby now sleeping in her arms. We'll be fine. It's healing, being here with her, with Agnes. Maybe there are some ghosts that need laying to rest. I kissed them both and hurried out, my mind whirling with revelations. Michael Ballantyne was my biological father. I was half Ballantyne, the very family Philip was so eager to merge with, the family my grandfather had apparently spent decades outmaneuvering. The implications were staggering. As my car approached Winter's Tower, I tried to focus on the immediate challenge, the executive committee meeting, rather than the family bombshell my mother had just dropped. One crisis at a time. Marcus Chen was waiting for me in the lobby, his expression concerned. I heard about the emergency meeting. Philip's been making calls all morning, trying to build support. Any idea what specific angle he's planning to take? Word is he's going to propose a compromise, proceeding with preliminary integration planning while a special committee reviews your concerns about the merger terms. It sounds reasonable on the surface, which makes it dangerous. I nodded, understanding. By appearing to accommodate my concerns while still advancing the merger, Philip would paint me as unreasonable if I continued to resist. There's something else, Marcus added, lowering his voice as we entered the elevator. James Pearson is here. What? Why would Philip bring him to an internal executive committee meeting? Officially, as a representative of Ballantyne's interests. Unofficially. He let the implication hang. To rattle me, I finished. Make me emotional, less focused. Exactly. The executive committee consisted of 5 people: Philip, Eleanor Reed, Walter Harrington, Thomas Bailey, and myself. As we entered the boardroom, I saw that James had indeed been given a seat at the table, though technically he had no right to participate in Winters Holdings' governance discussions. Philip smiled thinly as I took my place. Olivia, thank you for joining us despite the short notice. I believe you know James Pearson? He's here representing Ballantyne's perspective as we discuss next steps. I met James's gaze coolly. Mr. Pearson and I are acquainted, yes, though I question his presence at what should be an internal committee meeting. Given the concerns you raised yesterday about Ballantyne's financial position, I thought it only fair they have an opportunity to address those directly. Philip replied smoothly. I turned to the other committee members. Before we begin, I'd like to clarify something. While I appreciate Mr. Pearson's willingness to provide input, this is a governance meeting of Winters Holdings. As such, discussions of confidential company matters should include only authorized committee members and advisors. I looked pointedly at Marcus, who as head of strategic investments had a legitimate reason to attend, and Hoffman, who as company counsel was also appropriately present. Eleanor nodded her agreement. Olivia is correct. While we may wish to hear Ballantyne's response to specific concerns, portions of this meeting should remain internal. Philip's smile tightened. Of course, James has agreed to step out when we discuss sensitive matters. Thank you for clarifying that, I said, then addressed the committee directly. Now, I understand this emergency meeting was called to discuss the merger timeline, despite yesterday's full board decision to delay for review. May I ask what constitutes the emergency that couldn't wait for our regular meeting next month? Philip launched into a carefully prepared presentation about market timing, competitive pressures, and the risks of delay. James occasionally interjected with comments about Ballantyne's other options if Winters continued to hesitate. The message was clear: push forward now, or lose the opportunity forever. When they finished, Walter Harrington spoke up. While I appreciate the concerns about timing, I'm uncomfortable proceeding against the explicit direction of the full board. Arthur was always insistent that major decisions follow proper governance channels. This isn't a major decision, Philip countered. It's simply preliminary work to prepare for the possibility of a merger, should the board eventually approve it. At significant expense, I noted, reviewing the budget Philip had proposed for consultants and integration planning. Nearly $2 million in the next 30 days alone. That seems excessive for what you're characterizing as contingency planning. Thomas Bailey, who had been quiet until now, cleared his throat. I tend to agree with Olivia. This feels like an attempt to create a fait accompli, making it more difficult for the board to ultimately reject the merger after significant resources have been invested. Philip's facade of reasonableness began to crack. We're losing a tremendous opportunity here. Ballantyne won't wait forever while we indulge Olivia's inexperience and emotional decision-making. I resent that characterization, I said evenly. My concerns about the merger are substantive and specific, based on careful review of the terms and potential impacts on Winters Holdings' long-term stability. James leaned forward. Olivia, if I may, your concerns seem to stem from a fundamental misunderstanding of modern financial markets. What might appear risky to someone with your limited business background actually represents standard industry practice. The condescension in his tone was unmistakable. Before I could respond, Eleanor Reed spoke up, her voice sharp. Mr. Pearson, I've been in finance for over 40 years, and I share many of Olivia's concerns. Perhaps you'd care to suggest I have a limited business background as well? James had the grace to look uncomfortable. Of course not, Ms. Reed. I simply meant— We know exactly what you meant, she cut him off. And it's precisely this attitude that concerns me about Ballantyne's approach to this merger. The assumption that Winters Holdings needs to be guided by your supposedly superior expertise, rather than treated as an equal partner with its own valuable perspectives and traditions. The meeting continued in this vein for another hour. Philip pushing, the committee largely resisting, James occasionally attempting to undermine my credibility with veiled references to our personal history. By the end, it was clear Philip didn't have the votes to override the board's decision, even on preparatory measures. As the meeting concluded, Philip made one final attempt. I move that we at least form a special committee to conduct accelerated due diligence on the specific concerns Olivia has raised, with a report due to the board within 30 days, rather than 6 months. It was a reasonable compromise, and one that would be difficult to oppose without appearing obstructionist. I considered for a moment, then nodded. I'll support that, with one condition, that the special committee include independent advisors, with no prior relationship to either Winters or Ballantyne, to ensure objective assessment. Philip hesitated, clearly caught off guard by my acceptance. That seems unnecessary. On the contrary, I countered, if the committee's findings are to have credibility with the full board, independence is essential. Otherwise, it will simply be viewed as an extension of your advocacy for the merger. Eleanor and Walter both nodded their agreement, and Thomas Bailey formally seconded my amendment. Philip had no choice but to accept, though his expression made it clear he considered it a setback. As we gathered our materials to leave, James approached me. Can we speak privately for a moment? I glanced at Marcus, who hovered nearby. Anything you need to say can be said in front of my colleagues. James's jaw tightened. Fine. I wanted to let you know I've filed for formal visitation rights with Lily. My lawyer will be contacting yours to arrange a schedule. Though I'd been half expecting this move after his threats the previous day, the public announcement of it caught me off guard. This isn't the appropriate venue for personal discussions, James. I disagree. Since you've made it clear our personal history is influencing your business decisions, it seems entirely relevant. I felt a flash of anger but kept my expression neutral. My decisions are based on what's best for Winters Holdings. If you're pursuing visitation with our daughter, I hope it's because you genuinely want a relationship with her, not as leverage in a business negotiation. That would be truly despicable, even for you. Without waiting for his response, I turned and walked away, my head high despite the turmoil inside. In less than 24 hours, I'd learned I was half Ballantine, faced down the executive committee, and now had to prepare for a custody battle on top of everything else. As Marcus and I rode the elevator down, he asked quietly, "Are you all right?"
Ino when he intentionally with that the days the stick it had changed the man and attack the slowly the he wasn't just about protecting anything that they could hand for that a torture
and secrets that could upend everything if they came to light at the wrong moment. The car was waiting to take me back to Beacon Hill, back to my mother and the rest of the story she had yet to tell. I had a feeling the revelations were only beginning. The house was quiet when I returned, but tension hung in the air like an approaching storm. I found my mother in the library with Mrs. Collins, their hushed conversation stopping abruptly when I entered. "How was the meeting?" my mother asked, studying my face. "Manageable. Philip tried to push through merger preparations despite yesterday's board decision. He failed." I sank into a chair opposite them. James was there. He's filing for visitation rights with Lily, trying to use her as leverage. My mother's expression hardened. Like father, like son. The Ballantine men have always used family as pawns. "You have more to tell me," I said. Not a question, but a statement. She nodded gravely. "After I left Boston pregnant with you, I tried to build a new life far from the Winters Ballantine drama. I believed I'd succeeded until your 5th birthday when Arthur somehow found us." "He came to see me?" "I don't remember." "You wouldn't. He watched from a distance, a old man in a park across from your school. I confronted him, told him to stay away. That's when he revealed he'd known all along who your biological father was." "How? Did you tell him?" "No." But apparently Michael had suspected the timing and confronted Arthur shortly after I disappeared. "Arthur had you DNA tested without my knowledge. A strand of hair from a childhood checkup was all it took." My stomach twisted. "So he's always known I was half Ballantine." "Yes. And he spent the next 25 years ensuring that when the time came, the Winters legacy would pass to you, his revenge against the Ballantines and their ambitions." "But why didn't Michael ever contact me? If he suspected I was his daughter..." "Because Arthur gave him a choice: stay away completely, or he would use his influence to destroy Michael's position within Ballantine Capital. Your father chose his career over his potential child." The revelation stung, even though I'd never known this man existed until today. "So my inheritance is really about an old man's revenge?" "Partly," my mother admitted. "But I think it was also Arthur's attempt at redemption. He genuinely believed you would be a better steward of the Winters legacy than Philip." "And the Ballantines? Do they know who I am?" Mrs. Collins spoke up. "Richard Ballantine, the father, knows. Michael might suspect, but the current generation at Ballantine Capital, including Richard's nephew who runs it now? Unlikely." The implications were staggering. If Ballantine's leadership discovered that the controlling shareholder of Winters Holdings was biologically a Ballantine, it could change everything about their approach to the merger. "Is this why you warned me not to trust Eleanor Reed or the others? Because they might know this secret?" My mother shook her head. "No. That's about something else entirely. The real reason the Ballantines have pursued Winters Holdings so persistently for generations." She exchanged a glance with Mrs. Collins, who nodded and continued the story. "In the vault beneath Winters, Tower is documentation of something the Ballantines have sought for decades, proof that during the Depression, Harold Winters didn't just outmaneuver Richard Ballantine's father. He actively sabotaged Ballantine investments, using insider information and possibly illegal means. If that proof became public," my mother added, "it could lead to lawsuits, regulatory investigations, even criminal charges against the Winters estate. The statute of limitations wouldn't apply if fraud was involved. The merger isn't just about business synergy, I realized. It's about gaining control of the vault and those documents. Precisely. Arthur protected those papers fiercely. They're his insurance policy. As long as the Ballantines know they exist but can't access them, they can't move against Winter's holdings directly. And now I control access, I said, understanding dawning. That's why Philip is so desperate to push this merger through. If the Ballantines gain control, they could destroy Winter's holdings entirely, my mother finished, or at minimum extract a settlement that would decimate the company's value. I stood, pacing the library. James knows. That's why he suddenly wants back in my life, why he's using Lily as leverage. He's working with the Ballantines to gain access through me. My mother's expression was grim. It's what the Ballantine men have always done. Use personal connections for business advantage. Michael did it to me. Now his son is trying to do it to you. What do I do? If I block the merger completely, they'll just find another approach. If I allow it, I risk everything my grandfather built. There's a third option, Mrs. Collins said quietly. One Arthur considered but never implemented. Use the truth strategically. My mother looked startled. Agnes, no. That would expose Olivia. To what? She's already at the center of this whether she wishes it or not. Perhaps it's time for transparency, on her terms, rather than waiting for Philip or the Ballantines to discover it and use it against her. As they debated, my phone rang. Martin Hoffman. Ms. Pearson, I've found something about Richard Ballantine you need to see immediately. And there's been a development. Philip has called a press conference for tomorrow morning. The subject is leadership concerns at Winters Holdings. He's going public with attacks on me, I realized, trying to force my hand before the special committee can even begin its work. It appears so. I think we need to consider a preemptive strategy. I looked at my mother and Mrs. Collins, the generations of Winters Ballantine secrets between them, and made a decision. Set up a meeting with Richard Ballantine, tonight if possible. Just him, no other Ballantine executives, no Philip, no lawyers, except you. May I ask what you're planning? The truth, Mr. Hoffman. After generations of secrets and manipulation, I'm going to try something radical. Honesty. As I hung up, my mother looked concerned. Olivia, are you sure? Once this is out? No, I'm not sure. But I'm tired of being a pawn in a game that started decades before I was born. If I'm both Winters and Ballantine, maybe it's time both families faced that reality, and all the uncomfortable truths that come with it. The die was cast. Tomorrow would bring either breakthrough or disaster. But for the first time since inheriting this complicated legacy, I felt truly in control of my own destiny. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.